Hello, good morning, good afternoon, good evening, depending on where you are listening to us, watching this first international conference on building feminist academia. We welcome you to this conference, and we want to tell you a little bit about the conference and its origins. This conference is organized by the Feminist Network of Social Sciences, in Spanish, Red Feminista de las Ciencias Sociales. And just to tell you a bit about us, we are a non-profit and voluntary feminist network of women, LGBTQ plus community, and indigenous people from Chile who work in the social sciences in Chile. The network was born in 2021, in March of 2 years ago, actually, in Chile, and our aim was to contribute to reducing gender inequality in the social sciences, also competitiveness and precariousness, particularly in academia, but also other areas in the production of social sciences. We seek to be a critical, constructive space for the academic world. And over these 2 years, we have developed a series of activities such as seminars, self-training activities, also podcasts, reading groups, and very different activities to establish collaboration between people working in the social sciences and also to give visibility to our work. So our work is basically organized into 7 pillars. First of all, the creation of spaces to give visibility to the work undertaken by women, LGBTQ plus community in the social sciences. Second, promoting spaces for collaboration and support between people who have usually occupied spaces of marginalization in the social sciences. Also, promotion of spaces for self-training and promotion of mechanisms of self-care and care between people who work in the social sciences, particularly people who occupy subordinate positions in this field. We have also sought to problematize the current criteria of academic productivity in the social sciences and also problematize what is considered valid knowledge in the social sciences. Sixth pillar is problematizing the structural inequalities in the social sciences, particularly gender gaps in research carried out in our field. Last but not least, we have tried to contribute to reporting practices of power abuse and gender violence in academic spaces. So we are not going to give you all the details about the activities we have carried out, but you can find out more about them in our webpage and in our networks, our social networks. So we came out with the idea of organizing this conference after coordinating a symposium for the International Sociological Association, the ISA World Congress, which will be carried out in Melbourne this year in June. And this symposium was called Building Feminist Academia, Research Experiences from the Social Sciences. We received more than 35 papers for this symposium, so we realized that there was a huge interest in the topic, and we decided that there was the need of having the space for promoting more discussion about this. Thus, we congregated several people from different countries for this conference, which gathers papers from different continents, problematize current structures and practices in the field of the social sciences under a feminist lens. So the ultimate ultimate goal of this conference is to constitute an international research network to critically and systematically explore the possibilities for building academia from a feminist lens in different countries, and try to understand how we can help each other in this work. So the conference is organized into three sessions. Each of them lasts 1 hour and 15 minutes. The first one, Francisca, if you can go to the next slide. The first one starts at 9:15 time in Chile, and will last until 10:30 time in Chile, of course. So, well, we will start a bit earlier, actually, now that I'm looking at the time. And the first presenter is Mariane Silva Reghim. Please forgive me if I am mispronouncing your name. She's from Universidade do Estado do Rio de Janeiro. The second presentation is by Daniela Miranda from the Centro de Estudos Sociais de la Universidad de Coimbra. The third presentation is by María, Elena, Acuña and Paula Barriga from Universidad de Chile. And the fourth is from Javiera from the Centro de Estudios Urbanos Territoriales and Universidad Católica del Maule. Just to remind you, the official language of the conference is English, just to favor the international conversation, because several of the participants do not speak Spanish. However, we have some presentations which will be held in Spanish. We will be able to translate when necessary. For those who are watching us on YouTube, please feel free to post comments or questions in the language you feel more comfortable, and we will be able to help with translation. So we will start then with Mariane. Mariane, you can share your screen if you want.
Is okay? Can you see?
Perfect.
Okay, thank you. So, hi, I am Mariane. I am from Brazil, and I would like to thank you to the organizers, Denise, Francisca, and Manuela, for this important initiative, and to greet all the other participants here. And I am very excited to be here and to learn with you today. Okay, so this presentation is a fragment of my PhD thesis. My thesis is Women in Theories and the Women in Movement, a feminist critique of social movements theories. The thesis is divided in two parts. In the first, it delves into the debates between gender and science in historical and social aspects, using sociological, epistemological, and methodological arguments. The second part is about social movements and gender. The main goal is to point out analytical, theoretical, methodological, and epistemological alternatives of incorporating feminist critique of science into theories of social movements for structural, cultural, and symbolic issues. But in this presentation, however, I will focus in three main aspects which are present in the first part of the thesis. So the approach is: 1, the historically recorded participation of the women in science; 2, categories that express the inequalities posed for women in science; and 3, the colonial and feminist proposals. So the first one, history. There is a history in which canonical names, male, are constantly mobilized as agents of major transformations. And in general, this history is androcentric. Furthermore, there is also the history of women's science, which seeks to find protagonists and agents of knowledge over the time. The association between science and gender is complex. That is, on the one hand, it's possible to state with some certainty that the women are excluded from the spaces in which they were allowed to do science. On the other hand, by taking a closer look, it's possible to realize that women are often present in this space, but were not considered qualified or capable of doing scientific work. Understanding the connection between gender and science involves understanding the historical, social, and political development of science itself, and the direct and indirect relationship to how gender guides social relations. Historical phases, political and ideological projects must also be considered. After all, science is not an a priori entity that exists by itself, but a type of knowledge developed by people and that can take on various purposes. Think about the history of women in science. Scheibinger highlights 4 significant aspects. First, the importance of scientific institutions, the way they have developed over the years, and the way their guidelines can alter women's participation. Second, the division of labor between genders, the jobs that are paid and the ones they are not, with special attention to the division of domestic work. Third, some interdependent factors such as economical, political, social, and contingent events. And finally, the denial of the myths of inevitable progress. That is the idea over the time things would straighten themselves out. Or how she said, the history of women in science, however, has not been characterized by a march of progress, but by cycles of advance and retreat. The situation of women has changed along with social conditions and climates of opinions. In between historical and categorical aspects, I would like to emphasize the epistemological one. Feminist epistemology has contributed categorically to the reflection on how knowledge and gender are intrinsically related. Feminist epistemology is about how gender influences what we consider and value as knowledge. For this, Anderson proposes the use of 4 categories that allows us to identify normative implications in the construction of scientific knowledge. The first refers to gender structures, which allow us to question what would be the difference in theoretical researches if women had weaker status in the academia space, considering institutional and representative aspects. The second is gender symbolism, that is, what would our research be like if we change our notion of masculine or feminine, or even if we broke with this assumption? The third, which also appears to be like if we saw it through the perspective of women. Finally, sexism, which takes on less of a questioning character and more as possibility resulting both in the application of a given theory and its very content. Furthermore, Anderson points out that research informed by feminist commitments make available new explanatory models, reformulate old questions, expose facts that undermine the plausibility of previous dominant theories, improves data collection techniques, and changes cognitive authority relations between fields and theories. And to choose a category that is adequate to explain women in science must deal with the situation in which women participate in the process of development and discovery of science, even if occupying positions and performing less recognized and legitimate tasks. They participated, we participated, and were present in the university and intellectual environment. But women's participation in this space has sometimes been gutted, diminished, erased, either through legal apparatuses or through the appropriation of their knowledge. The choice of categories should be able to deal with this ambiguous situation of an unqualified and diminished presence, but without diminishing, erasing, or not attributing the necessary recognition to those who are there. Here we have three examples of categories of use to explain women in science. Notice that they are often linked to absence. The first one is visibility by Artemis March. From the notion of androcentrism, that the fact that theories are elaborated with the male experience as the center, base, and the reference for all other experiences, she develops three other categories arising from the invisibility of women's social science classical theories, which one closer to one of the classics, Karl Marx, Max Weber, and Emile Durkheim. The categories of invisibility are: one, exclusion, in which women do not even appear or are not considered as objects or subjects, and has its greatest example in Weber's work. Two, pseudo-inclusion, found in Durkheim's work, in which there is an insertion of women in the social dynamics. However, women's specificities are analyzed from the androcentric perspective. And the third, alienation, in which even if women's experience and specificities are considered as research data, and even if women also elaborate analyses about this reality, androcentrism still prevails, mediating the meanings. For her, this is the most difficult type of invisibility to be perceived, but it can be found in the work of Marx and his successors. And the other one is the presence and absence, or those that carry only a view of life, by Michelle Perrault. For her, the invisibility, the silence of the sources, and the silence of the accounts with what explain women's history. Because women are less seen in the public space, the only one that for a long time deserved interest and report, they are invisible. And because they are less seen, little is said about them. Here, invisibility appears as absence in space and absence of space. And marginality. This phenomenon can be attributed both to an individual at the psychological level and to a group of people who experience a certain kind of marginality, that is, who do not have the same kind of access to goods, public services, or even the cultural artifacts of social privileged groups. In these terms, women as marginal inferior would be understood in the key of the lack of integration to the center of theory. Moreover, it would be interesting to think about how this marginality affects her existence in the theories elaborated at the center as well. And the third, the decolonial feminism as an alternative to both androcentrism and Eurocentrism. Decolonial thinking, by focusing on territorial aspects in general, has its critique anchored in Eurocentrism. Think about knowledge produced outside the global north and the other knowledge matrices than the Cartesian one. Hegemonic feminism, on the other hand, heavy focus on gender questions and androcentric biases, by often without considering other matrices of oppression, such as geopolitical and racial, for example. So the decolonial feminism appears as a proposal that brings these two aspects together. It positions itself as a critic of both Eurocentrism and the androcentrism. And we have this modern colonial gender system by Maria Lugones. Maria Lugones departs from Quijano's analysis to propose what she calls a modern colonial gender system. Her intention is to genderize the reflections made until then by the author in the order to point out how a relationship between coloniality, gender, and race are aspects of the same process. Thus, for her, gender relations must be understood in the key of coloniality. Lugones moves on from Quijano's conceptions of the coloniality of power and the coloniality of knowledge, and searches in the reflexes of Latin America, Africa, and even North America theorists for explanations of the impacts of colonizations on our continents on racial and gender organization after colonization. Among the various aspects explored by her, I emphasize here those in which she makes explicit relationship between colonization, gender, and knowledge. The generified character of knowledge constituted by the coloniality of gender, in addition to all these characteristics previously mentioned, such as Eurocentrism and modern rationality. This effect is produced and reproduced both in European science and in the colonial science produced by Latin American men, so that the analytical, epistemological, militant proposal of decolonial feminist women must embrace issues related to gender, the order system, geographical and political distribution of both knowledge and power. And finally, two proposals for building a feminist and decolonial academy. One, the criticism of Eurocentrism and androcentrism. First, to recognize that scientific knowledge has Eurocentric and androcentric biases, and then change this. Point out how this basis influences the way that we produce and recognize what scientific knowledge is. To think and change about absence of women and people from global south in positions of recognition in academia, both globally and locally. And the other one is structural changes to reduce inequalities. Inclusion can occur on individual basis, but it's important to think about structural strategies. Inserting women and people from global south in our references is important, but it's crucial to produce mechanisms for inclusion. We need more funding for people who are not in these spaces and ways to enable the circulation of knowledge. Policies are required to include these people in positions of power in Congress and universities, for example. So, thank you, and here is the reference.
Thank you so much, Mariane. That was really, really interesting. I remind you, all the people who are watching us, we will proceed with the 4 presentations. At the end, we will have 15 minutes for questions. So now we will go with the second presentation, which is by Daniela Miranda. It's called Economía, Política, Feminista, más allá de la cuantificación de brechas de género. Welcome, Daniela.
Gracias, Manuela. Buen día a todos. Bueno, mi presentación, como decía Manuela, se llama Economía, Política, Feminista, más allá de la cuantificación de brechas de género. Les pido disculpas, yo voy a presentar en español, pero bueno, Manu después podrá hacer la traducción en las preguntas si es necesario. Yo soy estudiante de un doctorado interdisciplinario en Economía Política, dictado por estas 3 universidades portuguesas. Entonces, como este es un panel de discusiones epistemológicas, voy a situar esta presentación precisamente en las discusiones epistemológicas que levanta la economía política feminista. Esto es parte de las reflexiones teóricas que yo he tenido que hacer a propósito de mi tesis de doctorado, en la que estudio cooperativas compuestas exclusivamente por mujeres a partir de la perspectiva de la economía política feminista. Y la discusión que les voy a plantear ahora tiene que ver con el paradigma hegemónico en la economía neoclásica, que es el paradigma positivista, basado, ¿cierto?, en la axiomática cartesiana y la epistemología falsacionista de Popper, y cuál es la posición que toma la economía política feminista con respecto a esto. Si pueden pasar a la siguiente lámina. Gracias. Entonces, para esta discusión voy a tratar de sintetizar muy rápido cuál es este paradigma hegemónico, ¿no? Sabemos que el momento en que la economía se separa del resto de las ciencias sociales a inicios del siglo XX está marcado por dos grandes sigmas que pautearon de ahí en adelante el pensamiento económico hasta hoy. El primero es el cisma entre el método abstracto deductivo y el inductivo histórico, y el segundo es el paso de la economía política clásica a la economía neoclásica a través de la revolución marginalista, que es la que prevalece hasta hoy día. El resultado de este proceso, además de la ruptura con otras ciencias sociales de la economía, es la definitiva instalación de la ortodoxia neoclásica como escuela de pensamiento dominante dentro de la economía, que se complementó también con un giro hacia el cálculo matemático, la formalización, a través principalmente del desarrollo de la microeconomía y de la teoría del equilibrio general. Así, de esta manera, la historia del pensamiento económico, y específicamente la economía neoclásica, se asentó sobre el modelo hipotético deductivo. Y eso tiene una implicancia importante para la economía política feminista, porque una de las implicancias de usar el modelo cartesiano para la economía es que define también las características del agente económico principal para la economía neoclásica, que es el homo economicus, es decir, este hombre cuya capacidad de seguir las reglas de elección racional es análoga al mecanicismo y a los criterios deductivos de investigación. Podemos decir entonces que la axiomática cartesiana constituye finalmente la raíz epistemológica de la economía ortodoxa. Y en esta transición hacia el positivismo, los economistas del siglo XX se acercaron también hacia la tradición del falsacionismo de Popper, en una carrera por hacer de la economía una ciencia, ¿cierto? Bueno, recordemos que para Popper lo que distingue a la ciencia de la no ciencia es la forma, ¿no? Es el método y no otra cosa. Entonces, uno de los principales cambios que introdujo Popper en la filosofía de la ciencia es que la transformó en una disciplina que busca métodos de evaluación de teorías científicas. Y en esa evaluación, la economía cuenta con una herramienta fundamental que le permite situarse, a juicio de los neoclásicos, más cerca de la ciencia que de la no ciencia. Ese instrumento es la inferencia estadística o la econometría. Milton Friedman, de hecho, ¿podemos pasar a la siguiente? Desarrolló esta idea llegando a una unión entre la axiomática cartesiana y la epistemología popperiana. Puse acá un ejemplo de una cita de un ensayo de Milton Friedman que dice lo siguiente: el objetivo final de la ciencia positiva es el desarrollo de una teoría o hipótesis que conduzca a predicciones válidas y significativas acerca de fenómenos aún no observados. Tal teoría es, en general, una mezcla compleja de dos elementos. Por una parte, es un lenguaje destinado a promover métodos sistemáticos y organizados de raciocinio, y en parte es un cuerpo de hipótesis sustantivas con el objetivo de abstraer aspectos esenciales de la realidad compleja. ¿Podemos pasar a la siguiente? Vale preguntarse, entonces, en este escenario en que la economía pretende situarse en este extremo de la ciencia positiva, ¿no? ¿Qué lugar le cabe a las economías heterodoxas y a la economía política feminista en particular en esta idea, ¿no? Y bueno, aunque los economistas neoclásicos lograron acordar durante el siglo XX el cómo estudiar la realidad y otorgarle a un método el estatus de paradigma, diversas voces se han aferrado a las preguntas sobre el por qué la estudiamos de esa manera y para qué. Y esas son las voces que habitualmente adscriben a lo que conocemos como economistas heterodoxos o heterodoxas. Para algunos economistas heterodoxos, y acá voy a citar específicamente a un economista portugués que se llama Francisco Louçã, encuadrar la economía en el positivismo tiene al menos tres problemas clave. El primero es el problema de la definición. Al definirse como ciencia exacta, la economía debería producir modelos explicativos que lleguen a ser generalidades. Pero sabemos que en la práctica la economía está llena de relativismos. El segundo es el problema de la unidad de análisis. La economía ortodoxa considera como unidad de análisis a individuos que toman decisiones de manera aislada, creando la ficción de un homo economicus que es homogéneo. Ese segundo punto también es clave para la economía política feminista, porque el homo economicus corresponde a las características de un hombre que está en el espacio público. Y el tercero es el problema de la explicación, y que tiene que ver con que los economistas ortodoxos a menudo intentan mostrar a los agentes económicos usando la metáfora de la física, es decir, como si partículas en el espacio se pudiesen, como si los agentes económicos fuesen partículas en el espacio que se pueden ordenar de acuerdo a ciertas fuerzas, como si fueran fuerzas gravitacionales en una especie de orden universal. Pero sabemos que en realidad en la práctica esta metáfora no es aplicable a los estudios concretos porque asume que existe un equilibrio a priori que no es real, que no existe. Este mismo autor, Lousa, plantea que es necesario superar la idea de que la economía como ciencia debe someterse a la demarcación absoluta y que es necesario crear un nuevo mapa de análisis que incluya, además del cómo, además del método, el por qué y el para qué. Y por eso acá propongo que la economía política feminista intenta hacerse cargo de esas preguntas, el por qué, el para qué, y específicamente acá planteo que vale la pena preguntarse por qué y para qué incluimos el análisis de género en economía. La siguiente, por favor. Y bueno, acá voy a pasar ya un poco más hacia el cuerpo teórico de la economía política feminista, que pese a que es un campo de estudio que no es nuevo, probablemente fue con la crisis del COVID-19 que el lente analítico de la teoría de la reproducción social comenzó a ganar notoriedad en el análisis de los procesos capitalistas. En términos de Nancy Fraser, esto implica considerar que las crisis del capitalismo incluyen dimensiones económicas, ecológicas, políticas, pero también que la dimensión económica entra en crisis dentro y fuera de los mercados a través de las contradicciones socio-reproductivas del capitalismo financiarizado. La teoría de la reproducción social entonces se enfoca en los procesos sociales que producen la fuerza de trabajo como mercancía y cómo esos procesos sociales se entrecruzan con el resto de los procesos sociales que producen la mercancía. Y estos procesos se dan dentro y fuera del hogar, ¿cierto? Cuando los trabajadores se alimentan, cuando usan el transporte público, la salud pública, etc. Y así, Bhattacharya, que es otra de las teóricas importantes de esta línea, argumenta que entonces la teoría de la reproducción social analiza aquellos hechos que parecen obvios, como llegar un lunes a trabajar a la luz de los procesos que los produjeron. Y en ese sentido, la teoría de la reproducción social considera que el trabajo humano está en el centro de la creación y de la reproducción de la sociedad en su conjunto, y mantiene la idea de Marx con respecto a que el trabajo es la premisa de toda la historia humana. Sin embargo, lo que la teoría de la reproducción social cuestiona es el hecho de que el capitalismo considere solo el trabajo productivo para el mercado como trabajo, dejando fuera el trabajo familiar, comunitario, social, que se necesita para sostener y para reproducir a la fuerza de trabajo. Para las autoras de la teoría de la reproducción social, esto genera una permanente tensión o contradicción socio-reproductiva, que es de la que habla Nancy Fraser, pues el capitalismo no dispone de un mecanismo que garantice la reproducción, y por lo tanto, tampoco la mantención de la fuerza de trabajo. Por el contrario, generalmente implica un debilitamiento de la capacidad que tienen las familias y las comunidades para la reproducción social. Por otro lado, pensar en los mecanismos de reproducción en el sistema capitalista lleva inevitablemente a analizar cómo se organiza este trabajo reproductivo y al consecuente análisis de la división sexual del trabajo. De esta forma, aunque parte de la teoría de la reproducción social se concentra en explicar los procesos que se concentran en la esfera pública, como es el caso de Nancy Fraser, que trabaja con los sistemas de bienestar, la mayor parte de los trabajos se concentran en explicar los procesos necesarios para reproducir la fuerza de trabajo en la esfera privada, es decir, las tareas domésticas y de cuidado, también llamado trabajo reproductivo, que realizan en su mayoría las mujeres al interior del hogar. La siguiente, por favor. Sin embargo, incorporar la dimensión de género en los estudios del trabajo no necesariamente implica incorporar como dimensión de análisis las contradicciones socio-reproductivas del capitalismo. Y eso es lo que marca la brecha quizás entre los estudios de género liberales y los que se enmarcan dentro de la teoría de la reproducción social. La economista española Acuña Calderón sostiene que las economías feministas se pueden ordenar en base a 3 criterios. El primero es el lugar que se le da a la categoría de género desde las relaciones de poder en el análisis. O sea, yo puedo cuantificar brechas de género sin hacer ese análisis de relaciones de poder. El segundo es la posición que se asume con respecto a los límites de la economía neoclásica, que tiene un marcado sesgo androcentrista, y sus herramientas analíticas, principalmente la econometría. Y el tercero es el nivel de compromiso ético-político que se asume con respecto a la transformación del orden socioeconómico. Y en ese sentido, otra economista española de la misma línea, Amaia Pérez Orozco, distingue la economía política feminista de lo que ella llama la economía del género. La economía del género y la igualdad propone un análisis que permite mantener el grueso del discurso económico neoclásico, aislando la posibilidad de acabar con la desigualdad entre hombres y mujeres del cuestionamiento del capitalismo. De esta manera, la economía del género mantiene la epistemología y la metodología de la economía neoclásica, pero agrega la desagregación de datos por sexo. Y por eso esta presentación se llama Más allá de la cuantificación de brechas de género. Hay otras autoras, como el caso de Mesadri, Newman, Estebano, que tienen domicilio académico en Gran Bretaña, que señalan que si bien los primeros trabajos de la economía feminista se centraban en el análisis de las brechas de género que se generan en el mercado del trabajo a propósito de las labores de cuidado, el objetivo de la actual agenda investigativa en economía política feminista es más bien desafiar el sesgo productivista en los análisis de la economía política del trabajo, asumiendo que existe una interdependencia entre la producción y la reproducción social. Y así señalan ellas que adoptar la lente de la reproducción social implica necesariamente cuestionar las concepciones tradicionales de trabajo, aflojando esta distinción entre trabajo y labor. En su argumento señalan que superar las dicotomías que derivan de esta separación, es decir, trabajo productivo, no reproductivo, remunerado, no remunerado, permite también complejizar la concepción de reproducción social, desanclándola de la mera noción de cuidados, entendiendo que los cuidados son solo una parte de la reproducción social. La siguiente, por favor. Por último, creo que vale la pena revisar cuál es la posición metodológica que asume entonces la economía política feminista, de acuerdo también con Pérez Orozco, mientras la economía del género sigue vinculada a las metodologías tradicionales, o sea, principalmente a la econometría y al uso del ceteris paribus frente a aquello que la desborda, la economía política feminista intenta ampliarse al uso de otras metodologías, pues se entiende que lo que define la elección del método es el objeto de estudio. Y la economía política feminista entonces apuesta por un análisis multinivel. En lo macro se pregunta por este nexo entre producción y reproducción, y por lo tanto no solo considera al mercado como unidad de análisis, sino que también a las esferas no monetarizadas. En lo meso se pregunta por la relación mercado, Estado, hogares en clave de género. Recordemos que la economía política estudia en particular la relación mercado-Estado, entonces la economía política feminista agrega esta triada hogares. En lo micro elimina la figura del homo economicus como categoría homologable a todo sujeto económico, asumiendo que existe una diversidad de individualidades que componen el sistema socioeconómico en una red de interdependencia. Y en ese sentido, volviendo a la pregunta inicial de esta ponencia, que es dónde se sitúa epistemológicamente la economía política feminista, con respecto a este paradigma hegemónico en la economía neoclásica, podemos afirmar que sin duda la economía política feminista se aleja de la pretensión neoclásica de hacer de la economía una ciencia positiva que desarrolle hipótesis o teorías que conduzcan a generalidades y predicciones válidas. Y no solo se aleja del positivismo a través de sus prácticas metodológicas, sino que también abiertamente desde sus presupuestos teóricos, epistemológicos y principalmente sus pretensiones de acción política. Eso es. Muchas gracias.
Thank you, Daniela. That was really interesting. And again, to remind you, you can post questions both in Spanish or English. Pueden hacer preguntas en español o inglés y vamos a aportar con la traducción si es que es necesario. We will help with translation if it's necessary. So to those who are watching this conference, please post comments and questions in English or Spanish, whatever you want. So now we will continue with the presentation by Elena Acuña and Paula Barriga. Hello, María Elena.
Hello, everyone. I am very happy to be here. I am not very fluently in English, so I will try to do my best. If I'm not able, I will switch to Spanish, so I apologize in advance. Okay.
Great, thank you.
Okay.
So, do you want to share your screen, or do you want me to share your whatever you prefer?
I prefer I share if
okay,
if it is possible. So I am having problems. Give me a second. So or no, maybe it's better if you share, because I am not I have not my presentation here.
I can
now.
do it. Yeah.
Okay.
There's no problem.
I really apologize for my English. So okay.
No worries at all. Okay, I'm about to share. Can you see it correctly?
Yes. Okay. This presentation is about an analysis of the theoretical use in the thesis of the Master on Gender Studies that is part of the postgraduate studies at the Social Science Faculty at University of Chile. Okay, the next one, please. Yeah, okay. Bueno, this master was created in 2001. There are a little mistake there in the presentation, and was the first master on gender studies created in Chile, and this program is now beginning the 13th cohort of students. So we concentrate we focus our analysis in the thesis and that produce in these 20 years that are almost 200 theses now. Yeah, and the next one I am not going to read the text, okay, but we starting with this idea to analyze how the theoretical approach are produced and where the social uses of this knowledge. And for that we try to occupy the theoretical framework that from the anthropology of knowledge, sociology of knowledge, and other kind of theoretical approach that are have the what do you say, the methodological tools to do this kind of analysis. Yeah, and we are trying to understand in this process the change in this very long period, and try to understand how this change in the subject of the thesis are related or not related with another political process that are occurring in Chile and in other countries of Latin America. The next one, I don't know if you are understanding me or not. But okay, in this period, we have this 172 documents that we analyze, but that this must, in the more specific way, we our methodology consisted in a bibliographic and statistic review based on the data contained in this corpus of analysis, ¿verdad? From 2003 and 2021, ¿verdad? After that, we removing for this corpus all the documents we don't really, we didn't find in our research. Okay, there are finally 124 documents we incorporate and classify according the topics. Yeah, this data previously presented, we group it or we concentrate for analysis according to these historical periods, and each one of these periods was about 6 years. Yeah, the first period is around the 2003, that is the first thesis, to 2009, the second around 2010 to 2016, and the last period, and that's 2017 and from to 2021. This last period that incorporate all this social process of a feminist movement at the universities here in Chile. And then we, the next one, please. Yeah, we have these main ideas for each of these periods. Okay, and this is the way we are trying to look at the changes in the theoretical approaches and in the subject of the thesis. And you are going to see that there are topics that are very important, and other topics in the thesis disappear in this long period. In this first period, there were an interest in masculinity studies and gender perspective in public policies in Chile, and studies on the social constructions and of food and gender. And it's very important that the theoretical approach and the theoric reference that this thesis used in this period came from Marcela Lagarde, that is a Mexican feminist, Sonia Montesino, that is a Chilean feminist, Teresa de Barbieri, that is an Argentinian feminist, but based in Mexico also, and Cherry Orner, that is a very famous feminist anthropologist from state. Two of these reference came from the anthropology, and three, sorry, Lagarde, Montesino, Turner came from the anthropologist studies, and Barbieri is a sociologist. So well, we are now trying to understand in the more specific detail how these references are used in this thesis to propose the main concept of gender inequalities in society. And the next one, the second period, as you see, the masculinity studies just disappear here. They are no longer a subject of interest in the thesis, and also continue this interest in the studies of food, and then now appear these ICT studies, and starting to appear a very central topic in the feminist studies, that is the sexual and gender violence. It's very interesting that in the first period, gender violence has no central concern in this investigation. And have you see their change also in the theoretical reference that this thesis in this period use? Have you see now we have the disappear of Sonia Montesino and Teresa Barbieri that was very important in the first period, and appear other ones as Gail Rubin, that is a also very famous person, ¿verdad? And Celia Amorós, that is a philosopher, I don't know, from Spain, okay, and Joan Scott. And now it's very interesting that the only Latino American feminist theory in this period is only Marcela Lagarde. And this is very interesting. We are trying to also understand why disappear the other Latin American that was part in the first period, and how the master, we are trying to understand how the master in this period didn't have this concern about the what do you say, to use and promote the Latin American reflection or other theoretical reflection that we can name South-South, okay? And the next one, please. And in the first period, we noted there a change more biggest in this concern of the students, ¿verdad? And okay, we was reintroduced this concern about gender perspective in public policies, and now this was important because from 2010 we can assume that in Chile there was a more direct instructions to create public policies with a gender approach. Yeah, it was more clear in this period, and I assume that was related also with the social movement power accumulation. I don't know if you can understand that, but we have this preoccupation more clear in social movement, political women, political participation, and try to define these many local conflicts, ¿verdad? Through a gender approach were studied in this period, and started this this concern about gender studies and justice. Okay, it's because in this period also happened in Chile in interesting, what do you say, interesting changes in the judicial system, with a few new instructions to this, to introduce the gender perspective in the justice process. And here we have again the emergence of or the use of Latin American theoretical approaches as viveros, lamas, segato, and still there continue the use of Scott and Butler. And this is very interesting because all this period is marked for the emergence of this intersectionality approach that is an old approach, but starting to be very vigorous in this period. The next one. Okay, well, our conclusion, this is a work in progress. It's still in progress, but we have some ideas how to try to understand these changes, at first related with a political movement in the Chilean society that are very common. Some of them are very common in Latin America. And this we are also know that the first introduction of this intersectionality perspective in the thesis, in this student work, came from the students from Central America in this program, not in Chile. And that was very interesting because, this and also came from the indigenous students from Central America, and at first this concern, was important to challenge the theoretical approach that have the professors in these students. And the second one was very interesting. We are now look at the what do you say, the relation that the students have had with social movement and with local process that that allow us to understand this change. And then finally, ¿verdad? Sorry. And finally, we now are also trying to know if the students had in the past the possibility to use the result of their studies in more applied ways, as in the public administration or in other kind of studies. I don't know really if you are we are able to understand, but I try to speak in English to share with the colleagues from all around the world. And the next time I will go to do this better. Thank you very much.
Thank you, Maria Elena. I think everything was really interesting, and we could understand. Well, I speak Spanish, but I think people who speak English were able to understand. So no worries about it.
Thank you very much. Thank you very much.
We will continue then with the last presentation of this first session by Javiera Cubillos from the Centro de Estudios Urbanos Territoriales and Universidad Católica del Maule. Bienvenida, Javiera. Welcome,
Hola,
Javiera.
muy buenos días, gracias, Manuela. Bueno, buenos días a todas las personas conectadas a la conferencia. Al igual que Daniela, voy a preferir dar la ponencia en castellano para mayor fluidez. Bueno, voy a compartir pantalla. Igualmente he preparado unas diapositivas en inglés por si facilitan la comprensión de quienes no hablan castellano.
So this presentation will be in Spanish. If you have questions about translation, you can post them either in Zoom or YouTube, and we will help with it.
Genial, muchas gracias. Bueno, lo que vengo a presentar el día de hoy es una propuesta que estoy trabajando. En general, bueno, es una investigación, una propuesta de investigación que se sitúa desde la epistemología feminista y desde un marco teórico también feminista, que es un poco lo que he intentado trabajar en mi breve tránsito por el mundo académico y también por el mundo de la investigación. En esta oportunidad la intención es, bueno, es comentar una especie de marco analítico o cómo estoy construyendo conceptualmente una propuesta para mirar o explorar cómo se vivían lo que llamo tensiones encarnadas en el activismo feminista. Creo que esta propuesta, si bien parte desde una inquietud específicamente feminista, también podría ser eventualmente ampliada a otros tipos de activismos. Creo que hoy vivimos activismos sociales que se posicionan desde otros lugares, donde lo íntimo, la vida privada y principalmente el cuerpo es un campo, un lugar de reivindicación, o sea, que se reconoce como un campo donde se viven múltiples violencias que nos afectan, y que igualmente es el cuerpo afectado el que sale o se expresa en el espacio público y genera diferentes repertorios de protesta para manifestar o subvertir aquella violencia o visibilizar, presentar en el espacio público y subvertir también las relaciones de poder que ahí se encarnan. Es por eso que surge esta propuesta de investigación. Bueno, la principal inquietud surge primero, o sea, cómo llego a esta propuesta conceptual o teórica, es a partir, claro, de las lecturas que tengo desde la teoría feminista, la teoría ética principalmente feminista, y de ahí cómo llego a las propuestas políticas de feministas respecto de la justicia social. ¿Cuáles eran los puntos ciegos que muchos autores, bueno, anglosajones, pero también de otros lugares, estaban teniendo a propósito de construir este sujeto hegemónico como masculino, como el que explica, universalizable, que explica todos los fenómenos sociales. Entonces desde ahí, bueno, a propósito de la cita que ven en la diapositiva de Iris Marion Young, donde ella destaca, o sea, habla de la justicia social y destaca la importancia principalmente de la estética del cuerpo. Si la opresión contemporánea, como ella dice, se gesta a través de una estética del cuerpo, entonces las reflexiones sobre la justicia social también deberían incluir estos fenómenos. Y es ahí que me intereso, o sea, por pasar quizás por una reflexión más macropolítica, lo que pasa en los espacios públicos, para visualizar aquellos fenómenos, contradicciones o tensiones que se gestan en una esfera más íntima, que el mismo feminismo ha visibilizado como importante, reconociendo que lo personal es también político, y cómo se dan estas interacciones o tránsitos de ida y vuelta entre lo subjetivo, lo personal, lo íntimo, y lo social, la estructura y los fenómenos macrosociales. Entonces, estas reflexiones también evidentemente se cruzan con lo que pasa o lo que observamos en los repertorios de protesta del movimiento feminista en Chile, bueno, en Latinoamérica y en otros lugares del mundo, pero en este caso particularmente en Chile, y cómo evidentemente el cuerpo comienza a tener mayor visibilidad, quizás valga la redundancia. O sea, ya el manifestarse a través de la protesta, quizás una forma más clásica de manifestación en el espacio público, ya plantea una transgresión, en tanto las mujeres han sido históricamente marginadas de esos espacios y parten desde ahí hasta exhibir paulatinamente cada vez más el cuerpo y utilizarlo para performance y otros repertorios de protesta. Incluso marcar su cuerpo, poner proclamas para ser visible, entre otras cosas. Evidentemente, un hito importante es la performance de las tesis, que se viraliza alrededor del mundo gracias a las redes sociales, y que es replicada una y otra vez. Pero tampoco quisiera perder de vista cómo quizás esta nueva ola, como muchas autoras defienden, que posiciona claramente el cuerpo en el espacio público, también se conecta y es a propósito de otras manifestaciones que podemos seguir en este sentido una trayectoria histórica de cómo el cuerpo y lo íntimo y lo privado, la sexualidad particularmente, se posiciona y se hace visible en el espacio público en Chile desde décadas atrás. Pues también me interesaba reconstruir esto como leerlo, o al menos como yo lo leo, como una especie de herencia que se va renovando a propósito de las proclamas que se pudieron gestar en años anteriores o en décadas anteriores, de todo en periodo de dictadura, es que hoy podemos enfrentarnos o podemos ser testigos de estas formas de manifestación que ponen al cuerpo en primer plano. Entonces, desde estas evidencias, o sea, desde lecturas y también en diálogo con lo que se observa a nivel nacional, es que intento proponer, como traer un ordenamiento conceptual que parte desde las inquietudes de esta proclama de una ética feminista, cómo pensar una ética feminista que ponga la experiencia, la vida cotidiana, el cuerpo, la emocionalidad en un primer plano, cosa que estaba totalmente invisibilizada de la reflexión ética anteriormente. Entonces, si podemos simplificar un poco este tránsito que vivimos activistas feministas, podemos decir que se vive en primera persona. Primero es la experiencia individual que permite reconocer de alguna manera experiencias de opresión, violencia, que finalmente empiezan en una primera instancia a politizarse cuando nos encontramos con otras mujeres o en pequeños grupos, donde reconocemos que no es un problema individual, sino que responde a algo más grande que nosotros mismos, o que una experiencia particular. Y paulatinamente ese ejercicio de conversar y de encontrarse con otras permite politizar las violencias o transgresiones vividas por el sistema patriarcal en el espacio público. Entonces, de esta manera podemos decir que el tránsito va de lo privado hacia lo público, pasando por estos tres momentos, o tres niveles, en términos analíticos, para simplificar cómo construir el fenómeno. Bueno, y ahí es como de alguna manera conectamos lo que había comentado anteriormente, estos ejercicios de micropolítica, cómo se vive en lo íntimo, la opresión de género, entre otras, y luego se visibiliza, se espacializa, se expresa en el espacio público y se hace visible, o aparece como problema público en la macropolítica. Entonces ahí ya tenemos un tránsito que va desde lo íntimo, como decía, a lo público, pero que también tiene su evidente retorno, que va también de lo público a lo privado. O sea, son la vivencia de la dominación patriarcal que permite visibilizar en el espacio público aquellas violencias o desigualdades para proponer otra forma, bueno, reclamar, demandar y también proponer otras formas, pero a partir de esas proclamas también se establecen nuevas normatividades que finalmente nos interpelan y nos tensionan en la vida íntima. Cómo llevar esas denuncias, esos nuevos proyectos o esta nueva construcción de un proyecto feminista a nuestra vida íntima, a nuestras relaciones de pareja, en cómo ejercemos o no ejercemos la maternidad, en cómo nos relacionamos con las personas cotidianamente, en el trabajo, bueno, en todas las esferas de nuestra vida. Entonces es ahí que conecto bueno, la importancia de esta relación de ida y vuelta entre lo íntimo y lo público, como ya ha visibilizado el movimiento feminista, y también de lo subjetivo a lo social, y cómo esto también debe leerse en tensión, como de ida y de vuelta, por eso esta idea de viceversa. Desde esta primera narrativa me parece importante, o creo que es relevante entender esta lectura desde conceptos o propuestas que plantea la ética feminista respecto de cómo vivimos, o sea, cómo las mujeres somos socializadas en ética de feminidad, donde se nos construye como ser para otros, y de alguna manera esta reflexividad paulatina que se da en un relato feminista, nos permite construir nuevas éticas o formas de ser o estar en la sociedad, que plantean una contrapropuesta o que plantean resistencia a la feminidad instituida. En esta lectura yo considero, bueno, a propósito también de la observación de las proclamas del movimiento feminista en términos históricos y particularmente en el último momento, creo que el placer se construye como una clave de interpretación que puede ser relevante para hacer esta lectura del proceso. Es por eso que, ya usando conceptualizaciones de la ética feminista, como ya decía, podemos ver que este tránsito de lo íntimo a lo público y esta reflexividad que se genera plantea una tensión explícita entre una ética de la feminidad o la feminidad instituida y una ética del placer, en palabras de Gabriela Hierro, que de alguna manera sería aquella ética que busca la comprensión de la vida cotidiana y que plantearía a las mujeres o las personas oprimidas por algún sistema de dominación la búsqueda de construirse como seres para sí mismas, considerando que la feminidad nos construye como seres para otros. La propuesta de una ética del placer plantearía el autogobierno de sí y el poder construir nuestro propio proyecto fuera de los parámetros o cánones morales que establece el sistema patriarcal. Entonces es desde ahí que yo hablo de tensiones o conflictos, ambivalencias que viviríamos las activistas feministas al estar en un tránsito constante y contradictorio entre la feminidad instituida y el proyecto feminista. O sea, en las diapositivas de la izquierda podríamos ver algunos elementos que darían cuenta de esta feminidad instituida, el internalizar el poder o convertirnos como seres para otros, esta forma de internalización del poder que se da de manera reflexiva, pero también no reflexiva, y que nos permite, en tanto nos construimos como mujeres femeninas, o sea, o mujeres cisgénero, podemos llegar a alcanzar o tener un lugar en la sociedad, o sea, de opresión, pero que de alguna manera nos permite existir y tener inteligibilidad ante otros. Este ejercicio, o sea, o mantener ciertos elementos de la feminidad nos permitiría, bueno, existir en las dinámicas sociales y tener ciertos privilegios, o más privilegios, entre comillas, asumiendo la opresión, que transgredir la norma de la feminidad. En este sentido, la feminidad plantearía, claro, habitar lo instituido, este espacio establecido para la feminidad, que sería bastante restringido, pero que de alguna manera ya existe, por tanto podemos habitar. Por otro lado, sin promover una lectura dicotómica, sino también pensando en la intención, tendríamos la propuesta feminista que plantea el construir proyectos para nosotras mismas, para que las personas podamos construir nuestros propios proyectos, nuestras propias éticas, nuestras propias formas de vivir, planteando una propuesta que va a contracorriente o que busca resistir al poder, y que en muchos casos construir este proyecto, este espacio social inexistente, en tanto se quebra la norma de la feminidad, implica también menor prestigio social. Por eso también hay una negociación constante en qué soy capaz de ceder, qué readapto, qué me apropio o qué transgredo directamente, porque implica también pérdidas en términos sociales. Desde aquí que yo planteo, quizás es muy extremo, pero planteo que de alguna manera a transitar hacia una propuesta feminista o un proyecto ético feminista y evitar una especie de abismo. En tanto existe el desafío constante de construcción de un nuevo espacio social, que hasta hoy se está abriendo, se está construyendo, pero que no está ahí para ser habitado, sino que hay que disputarlo, o todavía hay que disputarlo. Y ahí es cuando vemos que feministas en diferentes niveles, por decirlo de alguna manera, realizamos demandas por reconocimiento, partiendo por el nivel individual, hasta niveles intersubjetivos o niveles de mayor alcance. Considerando este tránsito que he intentado bosquejar, es que planteo que estas tensiones se viven desde el cuerpo o en el cuerpo, y que están dadas por este tránsito entre lo instituido y lo inexistente, o lo que está por construirse. que implica una paulatina reflexividad respecto de la propia opresión, particularmente o principalmente de la opresión de género, pero no es la única. Y ahí es cuando también entra en juego, bueno, el diálogo con la performatividad del género y también con la interseccionalidad. Entonces, entiendo desde aquí que las tensiones se dan en diferentes planos, partiendo por el ámbito individual, pero también en el ámbito colectivo a diferentes niveles. Y es por eso que, en términos metodológicos, que no los voy a alcanzar a comentar aquí, planteo mirar un nivel más bien individual, o bueno, subjetivo, un nivel intersubjetivo que sería el de la grupalidad feminista, y finalmente al nivel más de movimiento social, que sería un nivel colectivo de mayor alcance. En este encuadre defino como tensiones encarnadas aquellos conflictos o contradicciones o ambivalencias generadas en el tránsito dialéctico entre una ética de la feminidad y la ética del placer, en la que se detona esta paulatina reflexividad sobre la opresión de género y se cuestiona lo heredado por la feminidad instituida y se construye, o se intenta co-construir una alternativa feminista en estos tres niveles. Encarnadas, en tanto se expresan en el cuerpo y desde el cuerpo, y al menos lo observaríamos en 4 ámbitos, que lo voy a pasar a comentar más adelante. En este escenario, bueno, el concepto de exis corporal planteado por Bourdieu me permite, claro, como sustentar esta idea, bueno, junto a otros autoras y autores, respecto de cómo una forma, lo que hace eficaz la internalización del poder es que pasa por el cuerpo, por un disciplinamiento del cuerpo, un aprendizaje corporal, que va a ser importante y que por lo mismo la atención se va a vivir desde ahí. Podemos entender en términos muy breves la exis corporal como una forma permanente y duradera de mantener, llevar y mover el cuerpo en el espacio social, aprendida desde la más temprana infancia y que continúa a lo largo de nuestra vida. Por eso es tan difícil generar esa reflexividad o hacerla consciente o llevarla al consciente y desarmarla. Y esta forma de moverse, o de mover el cuerpo, sería capaz de condensar y simbolizar diversas divisiones sociales, entre ellas las de género, pero también las de clase, la de edad, entre otras.
Javiera, tenemos que pasar a la sección de preguntas. Si puedes hacer como
vale.
lo más cortito posible lo último que te queda.
Comento 2 diapositivas y termino. Gracias, Manuela. Entonces, bueno, esta reflexión busco generar un diálogo con las propuestas feministas de la performatividad de Butler y de la interseccionalidad, principalmente comprendiendo, bueno, que el género es una forma reiterada de operar, o sea, es la reiteración de la conducta la que va cristalizando o dando forma de esencia a la feminidad instituida en este caso, y que no sería la única división social, visto desde la interseccionalidad, que moldea la existencia, comillas, femenina, sino más bien hay otros elementos que van a cruzar esta posicionalidad. Entre ellos, bueno, la clase social, la racialización, la edad, el territorio, entre otras cosas. Ahí, bueno, importante comprender que la feminidad se sitúa en una compleja trama de relaciones de poder que modelará lo que es apropiado para las mujeres en función de una constelación de estratificadores o diferenciadores sociales. Ya para terminar, quizás comentar cuáles serían estos 4 campos que hablaba recién, en los cuales observar estas tensiones encarnadas, que yo creo que son relevantes, al menos estas 4, o sea, podrían ser más, pero creo que a propósito de la revisión teórica, feminista, la reflexión y el activismo feminista, mirar por lo menos 4. Un primer ámbito sería la sexualidad, dado que la diferencia sexual ha sido reconocida como la raíz o la principal justificación biologizada del sometimiento o opresión de las mujeres, la estética o el cuerpo estético respecto de este canon de belleza que se impone también a la feminidad, la performance como el movimiento o uso de espacios, también están asociados a esto, como la propuesta feminista rompe o intenta romper con esta lógica, y finalmente el afecto y las emociones, pensando en cómo se vive o cómo se afecta el cuerpo en torno a la feminidad instituida, ser socializada y darse cuenta de la opresión en este tránsito paulatino hasta aquellas emociones que se experimentan al formar parte de una dinámica social más amplia como es el movimiento feminista. Voy a dejar hasta ahí la presentación para pasar a las preguntas y muchas gracias.
Muchas gracias, Javiera. Thank you so much, Javiera. So we have a few minutes for questions and comments in case you want to turn on your cameras as well. You're very welcome. And we have, well, I have a general question, and we have one question for María Elena. María Elena, if you can reflect about how the theoretical changes on the use of feminism approaches in the master is translated or not into feminist practices within the masters.
A very good question, Manuela. No, it's not related with changes in the pedagogical approaches or other kind of, what do you say, academic, what do you say, behaviors. I am not good to say that. The master is its approach in the dynamic of classes or dynamic of investigation is very, very classic. And that is because you know, the general framework that a university proposed to this kind of studies doesn't allow so much flexibility because of this process that is here in Chile is mandatory, that I don't know how to say in English. This is the accreditation of the programs, and this process is a kind of a national evaluation that allowed the students to apply for scholarships in the national system of scholarship grants. And you know, all the programs need to follow the instruction of this national commission that evaluate the programs. So in the last year, you know, there are this process show some aspects that are very disappointed for us, that flexibility or another kind of collective work, or you know, or the relation with social movement organization inside the classroom, for example, is very complex, because you know, this system has no space to this kind of practice. And now, you know, it's very, you know, the estallido social, that is a political process here in Chile, and the pandemic situation, you know, move all the academic efforts, the students and the professors' efforts move to a very classical model, you know, class and paper, class for evaluation. And, you know, the only, how to say, gap in this situation came from a Chilean scholar that worked in Mexico, that he is a visitor professor that tried to, you know, challenge this model with another practice inside the classroom. But when we move to the research setting, the students and the professor, want to a very clear model, very classic model with this introduction, objective methodology, and the chapter of the investigation. And we are trying to, create another ways to resolve this situation, this investigation process, but has been very difficult. I assume that is because, here in Chile, that most of the students are Chilean students, we have here a very, what do you say, very rigid, also pre-graduate, undergraduate framework of work. And then, many of the students don't feel very confident about their investigation skills also. So they want to, they chose to move a very rigid and very positive, what do you say, positive model of investigation. I don't know if I really answered your question or not.
Thank you, María Elena. Well, we have a question for Javiera. What are your thoughts about activism as a way of resistance for people in academia? Would you say that the femininity, feminidad, instituida, or institutionalized femininity is more present in academia than the other one? Es decir, ¿cuáles son tus reflexiones sobre el activismo como una forma de resistencia para la gente que trabaja en la academia, y si esta feminidad instituida está más presente que la otra?
Muchas gracias, Manuela. Sí, bueno, también yo, la idea, o sea, con este esquema o esta aproximación conceptual parte también de mi propia experiencia, o sea, es como me siento parte de lo que quiero observar, y creo que efectivamente lo vivimos en los espacios académicos. O sea, que he generado quizás demasiada reflexividad respecto de eso, y muchas veces creo que no nos damos cuenta las afectaciones que nos genera. O sea, tiendo a pensar que, a propósito de un poco de la feminidad instituida, la idea es como ocultar las tensiones que nos genera, a tratar de aparentar este canon de masculinidad. Para aquellas que nos dedicamos a la investigación feminista particularmente, que la defendemos, que la posicionamos, o sea, que hay ahí una apuesta política también. No sé si se da más, no sé si se da más la feminidad instituida en esos espacios, pero sí hay un espacio, yo creo que un espacio social bastante definido para lo que serían las mujeres. Si no te masculinizas o si no ocultas, por ejemplo, las tensiones que vives, que no muchas veces se pueden colectivizar incluso, o sea, no siempre nos atrevemos a compartirlo con otras mujeres, incluso con mujeres feministas, o sea, se da esa reflexividad, pero no siempre está el espacio, hay que crearlo y no siempre es fácil. Y a propósito también bueno, el espacio este que decía para las mujeres, y también las dinámicas muchas veces depredadoras de instituciones como la academia, de la publicación constante, la postulación a fondos, o sea, todo que se puede vivir también en otros espacios.
Gracias, Javiera. And one question for Daniela. What are the next steps for people inside the university and teaching to incorporate these perspectives about the economy? How do we do that? Have you seen any incorporation of those perspectives about the economy in the academic context? O sea, ¿cuáles son los próximos pasos para la gente que trabaja en las universidades o enseñando para incorporar estas perspectivas sobre la economía política feminista? ¿Cómo lo podemos hacer? y si has visto algunos avances en la incorporación de estas perspectivas en el contexto académico.
Sí, yo creo es que depende del contexto académico, depende del país, porque sin ir más lejos, entre Chile y Argentina, por ejemplo, hay una diferencia importante. En Argentina se enseña economía política dentro de las carreras de economía y en Chile no. Entonces yo creo que en el caso chileno es súper particular. O sea, la influencia de los Chicago Boys en todas las escuelas prácticamente de economía de Chile es tan fuerte que no es que no se enseñe economía política feminista, sino que ni siquiera se enseñan economías heterodoxas en general. Entonces, en realidad, yo creo que el paso tiene que partir desde los investigadores y las investigadoras que se atrevan a incluir ese tipo de teorías en los currículum. No se me ocurre mucha otra posibilidad. En mi caso, y yo creo que en todo caso, siempre son teorías contracorriente, ¿no? Voy a hablar del caso de Portugal. Yo estudio en un doctorado que es un conglomerado de 3 universidades, porque ninguna de las 3 universidades por sí misma se atrevió a abrir un doctorado en economía política. Entonces tuvieron que juntarse economistas de todo el país que eran heterodoxos para formular un doctorado en economía política. La resistencia, no a la economía política feminista en general, a las economías heterodoxas que están por fuera de esta hegemonía de la economía neoclásica es súper fuerte. Entonces, creo que en el contexto de las escuelas de economía chilenas en particular, que han tenido en los últimos años un vuelco también como hacia las business school, han cambiado hasta los nombres en algunos casos, es complejo, creo yo, no sé, combatir, pero como decía, creo que no puede partir de otra parte que de los propios investigadores, y en el caso de la economía política feminista, investigadoras también que animen a sus estudiantes, ojalá mujeres, a también relacionarse con estas otras perspectivas en sus tesis de pregrado, en sus tesis de magíster, porque eso yo creo que sí se puede hacer. Creo que es un trabajo que lamentablemente por ahora en Chile se me ocurre que podría partir solo desde las individualidades, poco desde las instituciones.
Gracias, Daniela. And one question for Mariane. As we experience the invisibility, marginality, or other ways to express the inequality in science, what are your thoughts about how we can answer to that from a feminist point of view? Can you think of any practice or behavior that may be an example of having a decolonial feminist academia?
Yes, thank you, Francisco, for the question. And I think this is the very hard part of the think about epistemology, feminism, and how we actually can do this in academy. I have like 3 thoughts. One, in the individual way. I think in our own behalf, in our work, we can, for example, have more women, have more indigenous people, have more Black people in our work and recognizing their knowledge. I mean, we can introduce them in our works, read them, and then quote them. I think this is very important because this is a measure on how we make these recognized people in academic. And for example, in the university structures, if you are a professor, you can be more conscious about how is these obstacles that women face in academia. I mean, if she's a mother, if she has this care job, and we have to introduce this in academics to think about this and make academic more, I don't know, comfortable to these people. So I think we have these individual ways, but we have to think about the structural ways too. I mean, we have in a more big thought, I believe that we have to be like quotas for women or for Black people, or for LGBT people, or for people from the South to be in political and powers places, in academic, in congresses, and in like professors, or even in review in journal academics, for example. I think it's important if we have like positive ways to do this. And there is one more, and I think this is very important, that is the language, because we have this English Center Academy, and you can just be circle, and you can just be reading, and you can just be heard if you talk in English. And we know that it's very difficult for, I don't know, a lot of people to talk English, to publish in English, to write in English. So I think you can think about the ways to translate these works to other language, and I don't know how exactly, but to do this more acceptable and make it do this better.
Thank you, Mariane. We have two more comments. For Javiera, can you clarify why the domain of emotions and affects needs to become associated with resistance, and how?
Gracias, Manuela. No sé si alcanzo a comprender bien el foco de la pregunta, pero, o sea, entiendo que es por cómo la resistencia genera afectaciones también.
Si puedes clarificar por qué el dominio de las emociones y los afectos necesita asociarse con la resistencia o activismo, me imagino. Y cómo.
Sí, sí.
Or maybe Tarang, if you want to develop the question so Javiera can understand it better.
Sí, no puedo intentar responder. Es que, claro, como que comprendo la traducción, pero no mucho el sentido de la pregunta. Pero de alguna manera lo que apunta a esa dimensión es entender, claro, que la institucionalidad o la socialización en la feminidad instituida genera ciertas afectaciones, o sea, también documentadas por la literatura feminista, vergüenzas, pudores, culpas, principalmente culpas, otras cosas, y de alguna manera el mismo hecho de darnos cuenta o generar reflexividad sobre la opresión que vivimos, las personas en general, puede también generar otras afectaciones, principalmente la rabia, las ganas de hacer algo, el juntarse con otras, y cómo también en este ejercicio de juntarse en grupalidad feminista o colectivizar la rabia o el malestar, también genera otras afectaciones, como esto de acuerparse, como el lenguaje de Elena Capnal, o sea, como el apoyarse con otras, ver que no hay, que no es una experiencia solo individual, sino que también cruza a otras experiencias, también genera otras afectaciones o el cambio en las emociones que se experimentan. No sé si me están escuchando.
Okay, and the last one, Simrit Tiol. Please forgive me if I am really saying your names in a really bad way. So she says, Javier, I really loved your presentation and the work you are doing regarding femininity. I was wondering if you have read into post-feminism, the embodiment literature. There is a fascinating and may connect with your reading on Iris Young. So there is a recommendation for you to read. If you want to say something about it, about preguntas sobre la literatura de postfeminismo, si te hace una recomendación de lectura.
Bueno, muchas gracias por...
I think we lost Javiera. Well, it was really interesting to listen to all of you. I wanted to invite you to make any last questions if you have any or comments. Otherwise, we can go to the break and come back in 10 minutes to the second session of the conference, which will be about feminism in educational spaces. So we won't stop the transmission on YouTube. You can just stay in the same channel, and we'll see you after having a cup of tea, going to the toilet, and we'll come back.
Okay, welcome everyone to the second session of today's conference. We are looking forward to this second session because now we are not only talking about epistemologies, which was the first session, but now we are moving to educational settings. So we are going to hear about 3 research, and hopefully after all the presentations, we are going to have some times for questions, comments, critiques, suggestions, I don't know, whatever you want to express. We will be looking into the YouTube channel too. We are keeping an eye on it. So if anyone in YouTube is looking at us and had a question and they don't want to forget about it, just pop up the question and we save it for later on. So don't worry about that. So for now, we are going to have 4 presentations, as I was saying. And the first one would be one done by Liat Rodriguez. Liat, are you there?
Hello, yes, I am here.
Amazing. Okay, so if you want, you can just stop. I'm going to stop sharing this nice poster that we have, but now you can take command of everything. You can share your screen. Perfect.
Okay, hello. Shall I start?
Yes, if you want, I can, if you are starting to going further than 50 minutes, I'm going to say something to you, okay?
It's okay. Thank you.
Perfect.
Thank you everyone for having me for this conference. And I think it's really important to connect with people from different contexts and backgrounds, because I also think that we all face really similar issues. And I'm going to share a little bit about this. So my presentation is called Saving Whose Face? Masculinity Construction in One Philippine University, Philippine Private University. So again, my name is Leal Rodriguez, and I am from the University of Auckland, but I'm studying the Philippines, where I'm from, and masculinities construction there. And I'm studying it under Dr. David Mayada and Dr. Kristen Locke. So I'm in both sociology and the critical research in education school. And this is a part of a larger project on masculinity studies, which is my PhD thesis. And I'm also looking at colonization and patriarchal domination in the Philippine context. So just quickly, I'll look at the context of the Philippines in case a lot of people are unfamiliar with this context, and my methodology as well, including feminist methodology, case study, and in-depth interviews, as well as the application and reflection on my feminist praxis. So my personal question is, how can we utilize feminist research methodology to understand the construction and perpetuation of harmful masculinities in post-colonial contexts such as the Philippines? And this came from my work actually in Philippine universities, and I'll get to that a bit more later when I talk about my positionality. But I do talk about gender sensitivity, and I did a lot of work on gender policy in the Philippines. But one question that always came up was, what about us men? Especially from the students who felt left out of the conversation. And then it's also a response to the older men who are thinking that there was a gender takeover, in the sense that everything was suddenly gendered. So their feathers were ruffled, and they felt a little, upset that their privilege was being questioned. So a lot of this does come from that experience. So quick context. So this is where the Philippines is, if you're not familiar. So, we are there in the Pacific Rim of Southeast Asia. And we actually have more than 100 ethnic groups, and we're 19th in the World Economic Forum's Gender Gap Report. We've actually slipped from the 12th place in the past few years. And we have 110 million people. So we have 3 colonizers, the Spaniards from 1565 to 1898, Americans from 1898 to 1946, and the Japanese from 1941 to 1945, or during the Second World War. And we do have a few issues in education, especially higher education, and these involve sexual harassment in schools, fraternity-related violence and deaths. So fraternities are all male groups in universities, something like university clubs, except they have violent initiations, even if it's not allowed by law. We have a lack of access for marginalized groups, especially marginalized women, so like indigenous persons, people from the non-dominant religion accessing education. And we do have gender stereotyping still in the curriculum, and the lack of women in STEM. So it's very relevant to the previous discussion, right, about epistemologies. And there is still gender-based discrimination just because the country is very Catholic. And therefore, you know, queer issues are still, we still don't have an anti-discrimination bill for queer persons. And so I think I want to highlight our colonization journey just because the university is a colonial invention, insofar that during the Spanish colonial period, which is more than 300 years, universities or higher education was really made for the Spanish elite and native elite. But native elites didn't even access higher education until the 1800s, unless they went to religious orders. It's also run by religious orders, so like Dominicans, the Jesuits, different kinds of religious groups that came as part of the colonial agenda. And it was also very male, insofar as only male were sent to higher education. There's also access to knowledge as gendered, which is why, again, it's very male. And, you know, the stereotyping is there wherein male go to higher kinds of science or higher kinds of math. And then during the American colonial period, they did create universities, but for teachers, teacher training, and training for government, a government that would serve Americans' purpose or the American colonial purpose. And so just to look at my study, I'm looking at feminist research, right? And we've already defined and discussed a little bit about what feminist research methodology is, insofar as it looks at women's concerns and prioritizes women's voices and experiences, and it genders issues, institutions, etc. But at the same time, so because I am studying men, I have to shift my point of view to look at men as gendered beings as they are, despite the fact that they're often seen as the norm. So I'm troubling that, looking at men both as the oppressor and the victim of patriarchy. So instead of men as the problem, we're really looking at, you know, how men both perpetuate, women and men and other persons, genders, perpetuate the system of patriarchy, but also see men as victims of this system. And so I do also want to value women and non-men's experience and how they form, you know, the men's lives and masculinity as well. And I also want to critically evaluate sources of power, because not a lot of people look at men in power and see that as a masculine issue. So those are just some things that inform my methodology. And so this is what I'm studying currently, this idea of true manhood or tunay na lalaki. And I'm using both an indigenous Filipino theory, which is Filipino psychology, to inform hegemonic masculinity, which is the closest theory that actually looks at this concept of true manhood and, you know, how Filipino men can achieve true manhood. And so I did, for one of these studies that I did 3 case studies, but the one I'm focusing on is one case study of one university located in the northern region of the Philippines. So I did 11 interviews on Zoom with teachers, people doing gender-related activities in the gender office, student leaders, etc. And the school itself was established during the Spanish colonial period, and it's known to be elite, religious, private, competitive, has a gender policy, and I use feminist discourse analysis to look at the different themes. And so I'm sharing a quote now from one of my participants who's a bisexual cisgender male. He says, I would like to first preface this a very poignant quote that we got from one of our earlier interviews, because he works for a gender center there, or he's a gender advocate who's a student. So he says that his participant said, I feel safe in University Beta as a member of the queer community, but I do not feel safe as a woman. So it's really interesting because from this study, and because I took a feminist lens to, you know, this one university and one institution, I was able to unearth 3 different themes. The first theme being religious hegemony, really looking at, you know, the idea that religion is taken as for granted, but no one questions how this perpetuates things like gender stereotypes and really privileges men in terms of things like leadership, insofar as perhaps only male religious persons or priests can become the president of this institution or the chancellor. And even if there are many women in positions of power which mask the inequality, a lot of women are actually in, you know, middle positions of power, so they don't actually break the barrier, the glass ceiling, and reach higher positions of power just because of the excuse of religion sometimes. And at the same time, there's this idea that they are progressive, this school, despite being religious. But at the same time, you know, that also masks how the people in the school can address, you know, the issues that women face, including sexual harassment or microaggressions, especially for women in STEM, women in sports that aren't traditionally female, women who, you know, trans women, etc. So there is still that discrimination. Homegrown hegemony shows a preference for a certain type of men or man because of, you know, this idea that there is this ideal male graduate, or this ideal graduate who just happens to be male, and even if the school is co-educational, or, you know, there are both males and females in this school, usually it's only biological men who can achieve this. So even if it's never said, from the interviews that I gathered, there is this ideal, you know, man who is this ideal graduate, and women feel like the school empowers them, but at the same time, perhaps they can't achieve this ideal. And lastly, there's this idea of the brotherhood or loyalty to the school, which forms an idea of, if I come from this school, I am elite and I can therefore access more positions of power. But at the same time, there's this idea of religion moralizing the institution and all of these people who gain positions of power, right? So it does mask how there is this neoliberal gender order present. And so just to go to my experience, I'm looking at my position. So I found out a lot of these things just because of my own work as a feminist and a community organizer. So I worked in different schools, and while the participants knew that, I pushed for gender policies, that I used to handle sexual harassment cases. At the same time, I am what Banks calls an indigenous outsider, just because I'm not from the school that I interviewed. At the same time, even if I am, you know, ethnically the same as the people I interviewed, we're all Filipino, I still come from a different, you know, my school is foreign, I am based abroad, so I'm still an outsider. So that sharing, though, there's some commonalities, and that idea that, you know, researchers for liberation helped the participants be more open. So I wouldn't have had the different themes or unearthed the different themes if the participants weren't open enough to sharing those with me because of, my position. And so I actually have one quote here. It's very long, but I'll highlight this idea about saving face. So this person opened up to me just because they felt, I understood their experience as well. So it says, I never saw myself as being invested in the culture of saving face because of this idea of the all boys club. And so this participant felt very open to sharing her own experience of misogyny just because she knew what I worked with and how the experiences and the issues that I faced as well when it comes to gender or promoting gender policies. So here's some pictures of me as I, through my feminist journey. And you really need flexibility, being sensitive to your participants. Sometimes you have to inform your participants and make it a conversation. At the same time, you need self-care for yourself because a lot of these topics will come up and they're very difficult as well because it's like violence, harassment, aggressions. But if it's all towards building solidarity, I think that in itself will push you towards continuing the research you do for liberation. So thank you all for listening, and I look forward to your questions.
Perfect. Thank you so much for the timing. You were perfect, great. So if you have any questions, please leave it in the chat or in the YouTube channel. We are going to check all of them for later on. And for the people who are in the Zoom meeting, I invite you to celebrate each presentation with these reactions that I have seen some of you using. So you can give out applause, that kind of thing. So for the next presentation, we have the presentation of Simrit and Pirko. Are you both there from the University of Alberta? I can see one person. Simrit, do you want to share your screen or what would you like to do? We cannot hear you.
Oh, yeah, I'll share my screen.
Perfect. I will let you know if you are starting to go further than 50 minutes, okay?
Thank you. And can you see my notes on the side?
Yes, perfect. Oh, no, we don't see your notes. We see perfect.
Just the slide?
Yes.
Okay, perfect. I'm just going to move this toolbar. Okay. Okay, hi everyone. I'm really happy to share space with everybody today, and thank you to the folks that organized this for all of us to be here and share space digitally. This is my presentation on neoliberal meritocracy holds us tight in different ways. Memory work of racialized women graduate students. My name is Simrit Cordial. I'm a PhD candidate who is supervised by Dr. Pirko Markula at the University of Alberta in Canada. And we are in the Faculty of Kinesiology, Sport and Recreation, where I'm a sociocultural student. So I have arrived into the fourth-ish year of my PhD. I've built great friendships, many of which are with women whom I share deep collective bonds as a graduate student with, women who are mothers, international students, beautifully melanin, outspoken academic queens, and even grew up in households like my own. This now brings me to a new set of questioning about my academic career, its meaning, its purpose. Graduate school provided me the necessary insight to name the powers that circulated around me as a girl who at some point in my life was pleading for answers to questions that everyone around me wanted to put on mute. Yet I still could not be muted. Instead, I got louder, angrier, more defiant, and even suicidal. Graduate school, in a lot of ways, provided me a space to learn through the systemic and structural answers to address why my father spoke to my mother the way that he did, why it was so difficult for me to make friends until involvement in sports validated my tomboy mannerisms, how my deep sense of low self-worth was not because my life was not worth living, but because I was being conditioned constantly to hate myself, a product of heteropatriarchy. I remind myself that at the age of 21, on March 29th, 1985, a woman got off a plane that took her across the transatlantic flow from India to Canada. And the next day she entered into a Gurdwara and she married a man that she had never met before. Today, I am that same woman's daughter, where parts of our two realities feel almost impossible to have existed under the same household. So this research project is one of three within my PhD thesis, which has led me down a path to draw question and concern to neoliberal meritocracy from an intersectional perspective. We are not in a post-anything. Neoliberal meritocracy is described as an ideological supported social system that advances fair social mobility within the existing social structures, yet ultimately it contributes to social stratification and further cements class hierarchies. Merit acts as this value judgment that gets to determine the parameters of who gets to act and how, but ignores the impact of social context. In the book Against Meritocracy by Littler, they have stated that this myth of meritocracy mobilizes the idea of equal opportunity in terms of class, and then does it in terms of mobilizing the idea of equality of opportunity in terms of race. Therefore, neoliberal meritocracy assumes that inequalities within the intersections of race, gender, and class are a thing of the past, and that we have now entered into this post-racial, post-sexist, and post-classist society. This is precisely why neoliberal meritocracy needs an intersectional analysis within academia. An intersectional analysis can help us further understand how neoliberalism holds us tight in different ways within the social context of academia. In very different styles of homes, the academic space houses the comforts and animosities towards what lives here pain-free or painfully. A failure to address action against neoliberal capitalism and settler logics situates women in asymmetric power relations because the issue is not placed on what structures we legitimize, but rather on women's failure to fully participate in those structures. I find the most compelling way to think about intersectionality is I'm drawing from Rita DeMoon's analysis of both processes and systems to look at the complex dynamics of power. So with processes, this refers to the ways that subjectivities and social differences are produced. Examples of this provided by DeMoon are discourses and practices that are gendering. And then systems refers to the societal structures that are historically constituted forms of domination, such as colonialism and patriarchy. But feminist scholars have been critiqued for playing by the rules of the neoliberal academia, with their successful career reinforcing rather than challenging the exclusionary effects of academia. Theoretically, this has brought me to think through implication, where implication is also described by DeMoon as being a disruptive force within intersectional theorizing and feminism at large. Thinking through implication can also question the binary notions of oppressed versus oppressor within the social context of academia. I reflexively write through my implication after sitting with thinking through all the ways that academia acts as an exclusionary space, where I also have to put that gaze onto myself. I write, nonetheless, I'm still here, aren't I? We cannot deny the unbelievable privilege of sitting in rooms alongside others and problematizing these social issues. After being in university classes for over a decade, the last paper I had to write for coursework started by stating, I hate it here. By here, I mean this institution, writing this beeping paper, constantly thinking through how shitty it is to dialogue about the world's atrocities while feeling the sickness in my stomach, even to have the privilege to talk about colonialism in rooms full of white people. Collins describes that academia can act as a critical site for exposing and resisting hegemonic ideas that come from dominant ideologies, and can also be a space where we can create counter-hegemonic knowledge through epistemic resistance. Failing has been acknowledged as being emancipatory, specifically in failing to adhere to the hierarchies within a PhD program can produce alternative ways of knowing. Failure can be a place for counter-hegemonic possibilities, which can encourage us to understand that failing means moving against dominant ideologies. Therefore, in this paper, I focus on the academic context and the experiences of racialized women graduate students within fields such as kinesiology and health sciences. More specifically, I explore how racialized women graduate students enact politics of refusal and resistance within the academic space, and how they build strategies to maneuver through the ideological systems and processes of neoliberal meritocracy in academia. Furthermore, I hope to get insight into the processes of differentiation that often involve othering our work and at times marking us as failures within this neoliberal meritocratic space. To do this, I plan to use the method of memory work. So this was developed by a group of Marxist feminists to research female sexualization. This method is located within the critical social constructionist and feminist research methods. My theoretical lens and analytical tool of intersectionality align with this method, but expands beyond just the examination of gender. The emancipatory possibilities of memory work hold explicit political value because it advocates for social change where in memory work, individual women, instead of just being passively determined by their social context, can actively think through and appropriate those social structures. I just briefly here have these steps listed for memory work, and I'm happy to chat more about this, whether it's today or if we connect off from away from this conference, but these are just the steps to memory work. And right now, we have not yet sat down and started our memory work project because I'm currently navigating with ethics. And so some of the challenges I've been having with ethics at this current moment is the first is this idea that the questioning of the researcher and the participant divide. Historically, within memory work, the researcher positions herself within the group and becomes a member of the research group. This is meant to address the power imbalance that occurs within research that usually has a hierarchical arrangement of the researcher and the subject. Therefore, the members of this project are considered co-researchers, and we contribute to this project in hopes to publish our work together as co-authors. Secondly, this distinguishment as co-researcher challenges the idea that memory work should not just be so easily equated to other qualitative methods, which is a conversation I have to have with my reviewers. Right now, they're lumping a memory work method as being the same as a focus group. And then thirdly, the last challenge is navigating the naming of people on projects versus remaining anonymous. Having a conversation with ethics review about this too. I hope that the co-researchers can choose their name. So then that means that they can choose, the possibilities open up to choose to rather to be anonymous, or they can choose their own publishing name or use whatever name that they want credit given under their name in academia. So that's kind of currently where I'm at pause with ethics. on navigating those 3 challenges, but hoping to start reaching out to potential graduate students that want to take part, and with a current plan in place for how the sessions will look moving forward, which is guided by previously done feminist memory work projects. Thank you so much for listening.
Thank you so much, Simrit. That was great. So we are going to move now to the third presentation. Thank you everyone who is reacting with applause, just to contextualize the people who are in YouTube. So now we are moving to the third presentation, which is done by Igor Ajero and Iralde Alvarez. Are you both there, or which one is going to be doing the presentation?
I'm here.
Iralde, yeah. You have permission for sharing your screen, and whenever you are going to be going out of the 15 minutes restriction, I'm going to let you know, okay?
Okay. Se ve, yo os he perdido, así que...
Se ve perfecto, muchas gracias.
Lo único comentar que haré la presentación en castellano para agilizar un poco la presentación, pero luego en la ronda de preguntas puedo tratar de contestar en inglés.
Just to translate that for the people who are here in English, Iraide is going to do the presentation in Spanish, but then in the questions part, she can answer actually in English, so you can actually have a conversation later on. Thanks.
Muchas gracias. Bueno, buenos días en primer lugar a todas y a todos. Como ya ha comentado la compañera, mi nombre es Iraide Álvarez y junto con Igor Aedo, que hoy no ha podido estar aquí, voy a presentar la comunicación que lleva por título Gender Really Matters in Group Work, a Visibilization and Politicization Teaching Sequence, la cual parte de una investigación-acción participativa que hemos implementado en la Universidad del País Vasco, en España, desde aproximadamente 2018, y que lo que está haciendo es arrojar una serie de resultados que, aunque de alguna manera es cierto que no nos sorprenden desde las personas que estamos trabajando la teoría feminista, pues bueno, sí que es cierto que consideramos que es importante poner al menos sobre la mesa. En este sentido, el punto del que partimos es la existencia de un sistema sexo-género. Bueno, de hecho, para nosotras es indiscutible el hecho de que vivimos en una estructura social que ejerce dominación sobre las mujeres, fundamentalmente, aunque no solo, y el cual se sostiene sobre una socialización diferenciada que define unos roles de género y que lo que hace es dirigir a las mujeres hacia lo privado, hacia lo reproductivo y hacia lo emocional, mientras que aquello que es público, que es reproductivo, que es de alguna manera razonable, queda reservado para los hombres. O al menos para un tipo de hombre que la ecofeminista María Pérez Orozco define como el BBVH, es decir, aquellos hombres que son blancos, que son burgueses, que son adultos y que son heterosexuales. A modo de nota a pie de página, sí quiero comentar que no consideramos que por ello haya algunas mujeres, en función, digamos, de su biografía, que no puedan ejercer violencia o dominación sobre otros individuos. Pero bueno, lo que venía a decir es que la teoría política feminista, precisamente aquí lo que nos ayuda es, bueno, nos resulta de ayuda un poco en la medida en que permite desvelar que este sistema sexo-género está articulado por una lógica inclusión-exclusión que se guía por las 3 tensiones dialécticas que aparecen en el PowerPoint, que serían la tensión público-privado, la tensión razón-emoción y la tensión dominador-subalterno. Estas 3 tensiones lo que están es organizadas en un sistema binario de reconocimiento social y también de adjudicación de género, que lo que hace es atribuir una serie de características que a su vez están fundadas sobre una serie de normas de género que lo que hacen es establecer cómo deben ser, de una manera simplista y binaria, cómo deben ser las mujeres y en general los agentes subalternos o subalternizados, y por otro lado cómo deben ser los hombres, lo que en última instancia pues bueno, configura la masculinidad, esa masculinidad hegemónica a la que hacía referencia antes, como un valor neutro, como una referencia normativa. Entonces, bajando un poco a tierra y en lo que respecta a la educación superior, sí que lo que hemos encontrado, Igor y yo y el resto del equipo que forma parte de esta investigación, pues hemos encontrado una serie de estudios realizados por otras compañeras también feministas que lo que hacen es dar cuenta de que efectivamente el género importa y que tiene consecuencias en las aulas universitarias. Entre ellas, pues hemos encontrado que tiene consecuencias, pues, por ejemplo, en la distribución de los espacios en función del género, en los criterios de evaluación, en los estilos comunicativos, en la distribución de tareas, entre muchas otras cuestiones que voy a tratar de ir desarrollando. Y bueno, resulta pues que sí, que el género importa en las aulas, más aún en los trabajos grupales, porque pues bueno, constituyen al final puntos ciegos, o al menos eso nos ha parecido, para el ojo del profesorado. Claro, aquí surge una pregunta. ¿Qué es lo que podemos hacer para intervenir en estos espacios, en los trabajos grupales? Pues bueno, para saber qué es lo que podemos hacer para intervenir en esos espacios, lo que tenemos que hacer es fundamentalmente contar con el alumnado para que nos ayuden a conocer cuáles son las desigualdades que se reproducen en los trabajos grupales. De alguna manera, tenemos que desarrollar alianzas con un grupo de confianza que nos desvele dichas asimetrías y que en última instancia contribuya a construir una especie de cesta de herramientas que esté orientada, si no a erradicar, si al menos a aplacar el impacto de esa lógica de género que se reproduce en los trabajos grupales. Para ello, lo que hemos hecho ha sido realizar una serie de grupos de discusión al objeto de confirmar esa hipótesis de partida acerca de que los trabajos grupales efectivamente reproducen la lógica de género, que lo que hace es dirigir a las alumnas hacia esas tareas de carácter privado, reproductivo y relacional, aquellas que paradójicamente pues, son más invisibles, ¿no? Y que no son tenidas en cuenta en las rúbricas de evaluación. Bueno, que de hecho estas rúbricas de evaluación lo que suelen hacer es penalizar doblemente a las alumnas en la medida en que, pues bueno, además de pasar por alto que estas labores son realmente importantes en el adecuado desarrollo de un trabajo grupal, realmente lo que están haciendo es valorar positivamente aquellas tareas en las que las alumnas pues, suelen mostrar de alguna manera más deficiencias, ¿no? Como pueden ser las labores públicas, entre ellas la defensa oral del propio trabajo grupal. Sí que un pequeño apunte, creo que merece la pena mencionar que dichos grupos de discusión fueron pilotados por alumnas de máster y también de doctorado, precisamente con el propósito de garantizar ese principio de horizontalidad, pero siendo honestas también para llegar a conocer cuestiones que de otra manera pues quizá no habrían surgido en los focus group, puesto que las alumnas pues creemos no se habrían desinhibido de la misma manera con el profesorado, y sin embargo sí con las doctorandas y con las estudiantes de máster al percibirlas de alguna manera como iguales. También creo conveniente señalar que las alumnas que han participado de estos focus group pues, se autoidentifican como feministas o han participado de alguna manera en algunas organizaciones de carácter feminista y que este es el único criterio de selección de muestra que aplicamos. Ya yendo un poco a los resultados, y de manera muy breve, a continuación lo que voy a tratar es de presentar pues bueno, esos resultados que ha arrojado la investigación tras las conversaciones con las alumnas, todo ello en relación con esas tres tensiones que ya identificábamos en un primer momento en el marco teórico. Esta primera tabla que aparece aquí en pantalla nos permite apreciar las referencias discursivas en las que el género se asocia a esas dimensiones, productiva, reproductiva, racional, emocional y público-privado. Considero que el gráfico es bastante ilustrativo, lo que nos permite así de manera muy rápida ver es cómo se disparan las referencias hacia lo productivo, hacia lo racional y hacia lo público. Cuando las alumnas con las que hemos mantenido este diálogo hablan de sus compañeros hombres, mientras que tiene una tendencia más a la alza hacia las dimensiones reproductiva, emocional y privada, cuando hablan de las tareas que ellas mismas asumen, ¿no? Que generalmente asumen las mujeres o las alumnas en los trabajos grupales. Esta segunda tabla, a su vez, pues bueno, lo que nos permite apreciar es cómo perciben las consecuencias que esas desigualdades de género tienen tanto sobre ellas mismas como sobre sus compañeras. Hemos identificado esta serie de variables que aparecen aquí Y lo que podemos ver es que las alumnas han destacado cuestiones como la pérdida de autoestima, que como vemos valoran que pierden autoestima igualmente tanto en las presentaciones orales como en el desarrollo del trabajo grupal. También vemos que hay un sentimiento de culpa en el desarrollo del trabajo, pero sobre todo tras la defensa pública de ese trabajo grupal, que se sienten estereotipadas en términos fundamentalmente, como ellas decían, de asunción del rol de madre o de secretaria, sobre todo como vemos durante la elaboración del propio trabajo. También vemos que se sienten invalidadas, que si bien se sienten invalidadas durante la presentación, muchísimo más durante la elaboración del trabajo grupal. Vemos que también se sienten invisibilizadas de una manera exponencial, tanto en la presentación como en el propio trabajo, pero fundamentalmente en el trabajo. Vemos que también se sienten presionadas, una presión que en los grupos de discusión se ve muy claramente, es tanto interna como externa, o sea, se autopresionan ellas, bueno, debido al sistema sexo-género, pero también son presionadas por sus compañeros. Y vemos que esta presión es mucho mayor cuando tienen que hablar en público, algo para lo que ellas no, debido a la socialización, pues no han sido entrenadas. Asimismo, también sienten estar constantemente juzgadas en ambos casos, en la presentación y en el trabajo grupal. También vemos que asumen una mayor carga de trabajo mental, pero sobre todo durante el propio proceso de elaboración de los trabajos grupales, y perciben que son peor evaluadas que sus compañeros, que son peor evaluadas cuando se realiza la presentación del trabajo, pero sobre todo durante el propio trabajo grupal. O al menos, esto, claro, no tenemos los datos, pero al menos sí vemos, pues bueno, eso, que sienten un sentimiento de agravio comparativo en relación con sus compañeros hombres. Para ir terminando, otra cosa que nos ha llamado la atención, aunque bueno, el pensamiento y la teoría feminista ya había reparado en ello, es que narrar las experiencias personales, como ya se ha comentado en otras comunicaciones que han tenido lugar anteriormente, es pues eso, ¿no? Que narrar las experiencias personales sirve para sentar el ejercicio de teorizar acerca de situaciones sociales concretas. Ello, bueno, porque realmente lo que hacen es apelar a una experiencia personal que da cuenta de situaciones que de otra manera creeríamos personales cuando en realidad son políticas. Entonces, lo que hemos observado es cómo las alumnas sobreentendían estas cuestiones que hemos visto en las anteriores gráficas como consecuencia de su propio carácter y no en términos políticos. Y precisamente por este motivo, aunque es verdad que nunca las habían pasado por alto, porque sí que habían compartido estas experiencias, bien de pasada o bien como ellas mismas comentan en los descansos para el café, lo que ocurre es que eran asociadas de una manera irreflexiva más a una consecuencia de cuestiones como su propia timidez, y no lo asociaban en absoluto a consecuencias del propio sistema sexogénero. Esto es curioso, cuanto menos, porque da cuenta en última instancia del funcionamiento de ese sistema sexogénero y también de las contradicciones estructurales que generan las asimetrías de género, que si bien es cierto que son comunes, también lo es que actúan de una manera sutil, precisamente por su carácter naturalizado. A modo bueno, para poner de relieve el horizonte en el que estamos trabajando, lo que en estos momentos estamos tratando de hacer es de diseñar una serie de estrategias que estén orientadas a perfilar una fase de planificación en 3 pasos. La primera estrategia de esta planificación, o lo que estamos tratando de implementar, es elaborar una rúbrica de evaluación de esos trabajos grupales, que lo que haga sea contemplar la evaluación positiva de aquellas tareas invisibilizadas que ya comentábamos antes, y por supuesto hacerlo en colaboración con el alumnado, sobre todo con estas alumnas que están participando en los grupos de trabajo que hemos conformado. La segunda de las estrategias que estamos tratando de implementar consistiría a la hora de crear los grupos de trabajo, en un primer momento, obligar de alguna manera al alumnado a crear un contrato de grupo, se le puede dar diferentes nombres, no necesariamente tiene que ser contrato de grupo, que lo que haga sea establecer quién del grupo hace qué, pero también cómo lo hace. También una herramienta que es complementaria a este contrato de trabajo sería el cuaderno de viaje, en el que nos interesa que se exponga en qué han consistido esas horas que se dedican al trabajo grupal, y lo que más nos interesa sobre todo es conocer no solo qué han hecho colectivamente, a qué consensos han llegado o qué conflictos han tenido que gestionar, sino fundamentalmente cómo se han sentido emocionalmente trabajando con sus compañeros y con sus compañeras. Y ya por último, en tercer lugar, en el horizonte de este proceso, lo que podemos, o lo que estamos, esto todavía no lo hemos llegado a hacer, es una idea que tenemos en mente, sería desplegar un taller de mentoría al estilo de que muchas universidades tienen de talleres de acogida al alumnado extranjero, pero en este caso alumnado de primero de la propia universidad, de tal manera que lo que esperamos es que si se logra centrar las desigualdades en las preocupaciones del alumnado y se consigue formarlo y politizarlo, lo que podemos hacer es activar a las alumnas, y quizá no en un futuro también a los alumnos que estén en último curso, para que ejerzan de acompañantes de alguna manera de aquellas personas que comienzan su carrera, su grado universitario, precisamente con el propósito de acogerlas y de aconsejarlas para que esta cadena invisible de reproducción de las desigualdades finalmente se rompa en nuestras aulas universitarias. Y no sé cuánto tiempo llevo, pero no quiero pasarme del tiempo establecido, así que por mi parte lo dejaría aquí. Muchas gracias por vuestra atención y quedo atenta a cualquier posible pregunta, sugerencia, crítica en la ronda de debate.
Muchísimas gracias, Iraide. El tiempo estuvo perfecto. Yo lo estaba mirando ahí, así que ningún problema. Todo súper bien. Gracias. So now we're moving to the last presentation of this session for now. And then we're going to have our moment for questions and comments. So looking forward already to that part, actually. So now we have the presentation of Tarang and Gayatri. Any of you two are there?
Yeah.
I can see, yeah.
Yeah, so I'll share the screen.
I can see both, actually. Great.
Hi, everyone. Good evening from India. And today, Tarang and I, Gayatri, we are going to present on feminist research, fostering feminist research, transformative classrooms and institutional spaces, as it is titled. And as the title indicates, we are going to talk about from our own experiences about the limitations of how classrooms are now and institutional spaces are now in imagining transformative spaces to foster feminist research. And before I go ahead, this conference has been wonderful so far, and we are very thankful for making us part of this. And thanks a lot to the organizers. Yeah. Is it on the next slide now? Yeah.
Yes,
So we both Tarang and I we're students of Women's Studies in Women's Studies Center at Jawaharlal Nehru University. So we joined for our MPhil program there. We continue to do a PhD there. And so this is an ongoing project of us from the perspective of a student of experience of doing feminist research in an institutional setting and being in classrooms, women's studies classrooms. So the methodology, we are speaking from our experience, also with our in-depth engagement with students and faculty from the community, and also the participation in political movements that is happening around us also informs our understanding. So the key questions we are asking are, why are we failing to make our classrooms transformative? And what does it mean to do feminist research? The structure of presentation is broadly we give a background and context, and then we dwell deep into the issues at stake. The background and context I will be dealing with, and then Tarang will take over for the issues at stake. And in the background, primarily we want to acknowledge the thought, whose thoughts are we borrowing in a way. So it's very important to say that. So for two works we have to talk about here. One is bell hooks talking repeatedly about teaching to transgress and the importance of engaged pedagogy and the criticality of classrooms and how theory can be liberating. And even reading her works are liberatory enough. And of course, the pedagogy of the oppressed, we cannot not take the name because of like how the focus was brought into education as freedom, the conscientization in classroom, etc. Coming to works from India or in India, when we look at the last 2 decades, we are seeing writings that are coming from other disciplines. We're taking sociology here, who talks about teaching gender studies in sociology classroom. So we have writings from Maitreyi Chowdhury on experience of teaching women and gender studies to sociology students. And then we have somebody like Sharmila Rege, who's talking about like there is this new generation of students from the marginalized communities who are entering the universities, and how are the nexuses of networks of exclusion of operating, and how our campuses reproduces caste inequalities in the context of teaching again gender. Again, then there are works of Wag who talks about how students are very marginal in their enterprise of business of academia, where research, publication, and even teaching gets far more attention than students. But we feel the missing perspective is the learner student's perspective. We do not come across many writings which puts this into perspective from the perspective of a student, which we are trying to do. And also here, we are not talking about any other discipline and teaching gender studies in those disciplines. We are talking about centers that have come up for women's studies, doing women's studies program, and what is happening to feminist research in these centers, or what is happening to classrooms in these centers. Why is it important to look at women's studies? I'm not going to this beautiful quote again by Bell Hooks, but some of us are entering women's studies with the hope of something being different there, or something being transformatory there. But then we encounter the same hierarchies. That is where it is very important to look at women's studies, relook at women's studies. So a brief context and history to what women's studies in India is. So like from 1960s to 1980s, there has been a number of women's movement that has been happening, that happened in the country, whether it be against dowry or whether it be like challenging family. And like in 1974, a committee was set up by the government. Then a report called Towards Equality report was produced. And Women's Studies Center is in a way the intellectual product of all these movements and reports. To put it very simply, the center came from the movement. The women's studies centers in number of universities in the country today has come from the movement, and it was very much part of the movement. But gradually, scholarly and political concerns did not share the common concern, but it was intersecting. So now, with the issues at stake, we are actually beginning to ask the question, where are we now? So now my friend Tarang will take over from here.
Thank you, Gayatri. I hope I'm audible. Okay. So I'm going to start with where Gayatri stopped. That given the background of the context in which the women's studies discipline and department started springing up. So with this genesis, this legacy of being associated with the feminist and the women's movement has also had a lot of repercussions on the kind of behavior codes that we observe within departments, what is the aspiration of the discipline, and a lot of challenges and tensions as a result. So, for example, from the beginning, there was always this aspiration that the people who are going to be involved in these departments, primarily women at that time, would also take some kind of an interventionist role. That this subject of the women's studies, not the subject as a study, as the object of study, but the subject who is going to be researching is also going to be an actor of change. Now, this over time has created a lot of tension between who is the activist and who is the academics. And questions start coming up as to is there a sort of a bias that sort of really separates the two domains? There is a lot of anxiety about that the field, so to say, has to be privileged, and the activist who works in the field has a access to a much more privileged knowledge, or has a slightly more privileged ethical standpoint. And on the other hand, there is also a slightly more defensive position that as an academic, you take the position of critiquing what is happening in the field, and that the activism or the field becomes your object of study. So this tension continues to persist. And this tension also gets reflected within classrooms that I will look at later. But again, looking at one of the things that we want to highlight is that instead of looking at these as an ongoing tension spaces or being mutually exclusive, how do we bridge this divide? And also, what is it that we are losing if this is the discourse that persists? Then also, moving further, again, while we have traced this history, it's not that all women's studies departments or all gender studies department actually share a commitment to feminist theory or feminist research. There are many women's studies departments that have grown from a lot more like a status perspective, which look at women as objects of being provided services, that take a lot more sort of a corporate model of service provision and are not really informed by a commitment to critique of social and political formations. At the same time, gender studies has another sort of a challenge and a tension with the NGO model, like how to incorporate that in academics, because we are also, as a multidisciplinary department, we also work with students who come from departments like social work and development studies. And their research gets structured or conceptualized in a very different manner, where you do partner with organizations, you do design and develop interventionist projects. So what are the ethical challenges there? There is, in women's studies department in general, there is a bit of a reticence that you want to distance yourself from that there has to be a sort of a separation between an interventionist role and between a research objective. So this discrepancy, because students are coming from different disciplines, how do we navigate that, taking a bit more ethical responsibility? Rather than just closing that as an area of discussion. So going further, what really happens in the space of the classroom? Now, because of the legacy and the expectation with which students approach, there is a bit of a tension that we assume that this is a feminist space, and yet in terms of the practices, because they're happening in an institutional setting, there can be a lot of discrepancies. So how do we bring attention to mechanisms that are still producing exclusions, the hierarchies that are reflected in the social constitution, or also reflected within the classroom? So we have a very diverse classroom where people are coming from very different identity locations of class, caste, religion, region, especially in a university like ours that has a very comprehensive and an inclusive admission policy. However, what happens within the classroom, while the expectation is that this kind of a diverse setting and a group of people would, there is an assumption that because we are in a gender studies department or women's studies department, there is a shared commitment to feminist thinking. However, in practice, there can be a lot of tension there. So how do we become attuned to the details, the nuances of what is playing out in front of us? And how do we cater to this difference? So there is always this sort of a hierarchical dynamic between the student and the teacher. There are also hierarchies between the student and the peer group, depending on everybody's identity location, depending on the access that they have had previously coming to this kind of an interdisciplinary department, or what discipline they come from, where have they been educated. And most of all, there is, because we are in a university space, and again, the way academia functions, a little bit more attention needs to be paid to what is it that is guiding our vision in the classroom. Is there, at the back of our mind, is there a model or a notion of who is the successful student, or what kind of a student from this department would we like to produce? What will be the discourse that student produces? How do they talk? Do they talk in English? Do they talk in multilingual settings? And this this constant sort of a shadow assessing of who is going to be the more meritorious candidate, and where we are trying to pull everybody who is differently placed, how we are trying to produce this sort of exemplary student model. So paying attention to that, how these dynamics sort of play out in terms of even the most basic sort of codes and ethics of communication within a classroom space. So, for example, who is it that gets to dominate a discussion? Who are the people who choose to remain silent? How are we encouraging participation among students? What are the strategies? Are they actually enhancing people's comfort and ability to communicate their experiences and where they're coming from? Or is it that, again, we want people to communicate and participate only in particular ways? How even things paying attention to the tonality with which we are communicating or asking questions. What is our purpose in asking questions or putting a highlight on certain people? Are we sensitive to how these contribute to actually creating experiences of humiliation and exclusion? So again, sort of creating a discourse around this, that just becoming more sensitive to even how do we talk and how do we ask the question. So I'm going to move further to the next slide. So again, reflecting on these tensions that play out, and what kind of strategies can we use? Because on the spectrum of difference, we do find people who are marginalized in different ways, and the question of encountering both very particular experiences of suffering and also coming to terms with your own privilege, depending on where you are placed on that spectrum, has to be addressed within the space of the classroom. And there are multiple registers in which that has to be done. There is one, I want to highlight just certain points of tension that happen within the discourse of a gender studies department in the classroom. So for example, the notion of experience, there is always a little bit of anxiety that the women's studies department, we don't want to be categorized as only a space where experience gets talked about, or where there is a fetishization of pain and emotion. And at the same time, how do we develop very critical theoretical tools? And despite this anxiety, a little bit of attention also needs to be paid that when experience is articulated by different kinds of people there, how do we make that as an entry point into learning from each other? So how do you learn from your peers who are so radically different from you? And how do you learn from their silences? How do you learn in a way that makes you reflect on your own constitution of self? So instead of going in directions of cultivating guilt or political correctness over privilege, different kinds of privileges, how do we come to reflect on what constitutes your conceptual horizon and apparatus? How do you understand differences between your theoretical understandings of certain issues and concepts? And how do you develop practices of thinking together, of writing together, that instead of making you choose a certain position over the other, or competing for authorships or competing for selected opportunities, make you rethink where you are coming from. So instead of looking for one solution or one assessment of a problem, what are the ways in which we can write and think together? So that's an area that we are working with our fellow students in the department. The other area, other 2 points I want to highlight is, one is the contentions around the curriculum, because these are multidisciplinary departments, and also there is a context of a lot of debate over politics of knowledge production. So how do we look at generating a way of getting students to also participate in developing curriculum that address their lived realities as well, while communicating the diversity in a global context? And the other part I want to highlight is that the recent developments in the university space, particularly regarding sexual harassment on campus with the Me Too movement and the recent increasing incidence of student suicides, one discourse that we see that is acutely neglected is how do we connect mental health with the social and with the university structures and cultures. So what is the relationship between each, instead of making these as an individual cases that require mental health intervention and isolation? So a little bit more reflection is required in what is it about the way our academic spaces are structured that is leading to certain kinds of anxieties, or that is creating certain kinds of people who are more vulnerable to harassment, and how do we move forward from just a discourse of impunity and punishment towards actually transforming these structures. I'm going to just end now, I think, because we only have 1 minute. On with like one last sort of a reflection on the difficulties and the challenges of what it means to be a multidisciplinarity or in an interdisciplinary department. That the lack of clarity in terms of how do we evolve a research methodology here, and the baggage of moving from women's studies to gender studies to increasingly gender and sexuality studies, and where are these frameworks coming from? So are these syllabus being structured and developed in participation with everybody in the center? Are they being developed in a recognition of the immediate context surrounding that department or that university, the region where we are coming from? Or is it that somewhere women's studies and gender studies itself is now becoming a more canonized discipline, where certain set of readings have to be done, certain authors or certain turns in theory have to be known to make it a credible work coming from this kind of a department? Or is there room to genuinely question the boundaries of existing disciplines and to have a very rigorous self-reflection over how we think about gender or being human, and how we can push ourselves further in being more ethical participants, both in creating scholarship and research, and also how we live? Gayatri, if you have any concluding remarks, please add.
Yeah, so the aim of this project is actually to bring back conversation on why women study centers. And like right now, we don't really see those conversations happening because these centers itself are in threat of closure, because we speak against state, family institutions. So within that, this criticism or these concerns have also become very narrow. And also there's important to look at the particular realities of Indian context, particularly when Tarang is talking about like, what are we reading, why are we reading that? And in India, caste, class, religion, all becoming very important markers of your place in academia and in universities. So we hope there is care over competition and dialogue over dictation, and an increased commitment and for engaged bridging of gap between feminist theory and practice. Thank you all. Thank you all.
Thank you. Amazing. Thank you so much to both for that. Yeah, there we can see now each other without the screen sharing. So now I invite everyone who were presenting, or everyone who is actually in the Zoom call and want to pop in with the video camera, that's fine. So now we have some questions for the presenters. So I'm going to just start reading some of them. So I'm going to use the same order that you were presenting, actually, just to keep that. So question for Liel. Can you refer a little bit about the school's rules regarding avoiding sexual harassment, violence, or discrimination? Maybe there are some rules in place. Maybe there are some rules actually specifically in the country, or maybe that depends on each school, and maybe you can refer a little bit about that. Also, another question that we have for you is thank you for sharing your experiences doing your research. I would like to explain a little bit about how you manage your positionality and the feeling of being an outsider in your research. Those two questions. Oh, you would like, yeah, go ahead.
Okay. So the Philippines actually has multiple rules against sexual harassment, such as the 1997 Anti-Sexual Harassment Act that covers gender-based violence in education settings. The thing about this rule is there has to be moral ascendancy over for the perpetrator for it to be considered sexual harassment. So like teachers to students, but there is no peer-to-peer sexual harassment. And I think in 2018, we released what we call the Safe Spaces Act that also became the game changer for addressing gender-based violence in different areas, especially public areas and online. How this pertains to in universities and educational institutions is it also started covering peer-to-peer sexual harassment, which previously was not considered gender-based violence or sexual harassment. So a male peer or even a male person, because most of the cases that have been revealed in terms of statistics to me or have been shared, they're mostly male perpetrators to female students or even fellow male students. And staff. So it's really, a mix. It's mostly men, cisgender male persons who commit the acts. And so those are the different laws. And of course, the schools can adapt different laws. Some are more stringent just because with the sexual harassment law, they are supposed to have like different committees that handle these things. And I don't know if I'm talking too much about this, but you can, research them. But some schools don't. They just, if the law is there, they'll only think about it when a case comes up. And that's the danger, right? Like it becomes more reactive than proactive. Some schools are very proactive as well, and they go above and beyond the laws. As for my positionality, insider, outside, was that the question? Sorry, how do I explain it?
Yes, it was about feeling an insider, but also an outsider at the same time.
Oh yeah. So I'm ethnically, to give more context, my positionality is like I'm ethnically Filipino. I was born and raised there. 100% consider myself, from the country, as my parents are not migrants. I just really moved to New Zealand, Aotearoa, for the PhD. So I am familiar with like the nuances and the culture, and I used to work in different universities. So that's why I can consider myself definitely an insider. But the thing is, because I've been away for so long, for a few years, I didn't experience things like the pandemic, or even the fact that I don't know the nuances of the different schools' cultures. Maybe they have traditions. Even the students having to take a few minutes to explain the structure of, their school system or the policy they're working on. Even sometimes their terminology, the colloquial language that they speak, their slang, that definitely makes me a little bit more of an outsider. So there's common context, but, we have to recognize that, the fact that they have to explain so much to me means that I'm still, in a way, an outsider. Thank you.
Thank you so much. I feel actually maybe a lot of us in here can relate with those last words. So thank you for that. Let's go now to Simrit. So I collect 2 questions for you too. There is a comment saying that it was really interesting how you share your actually positionality, and thank you for saying that. About your presentation, it's interesting how you talk about the paradox between going inside of the system in academia and maybe change it from inside, or just being outside of it and change it from outside. So maybe can you share some thoughts about what is your own personal opinion about those 2 options? And if you think maybe we can complement those, or maybe just step in one or in another one, that would be the first. And another one is a question about if you can share any pros and cons of using this methodology that you were talking about, the memory work. If you can say some benefits, or because I remember you said challenges, but maybe this is referring to some benefits and cons about it. Thanks.
Thank you for the questions. I think the last presentation really touched on that divide that happens between activism and academia. And we see that be kind of a continuous issue, I think, for a lot of academics across various fields of like, what does it mean to bridge that through the dissemination, through the types of research we do? If we're researching with communities, how do we, uphold those ethics around that? I live in like a weird place of trying to figure this out as I've been journeying through this program, which is like, how can you do research outside of academia ethically? Like how do you do that? And trying to really connect with the people whose work that I find is like doing that in great ways, because it is being done. But yeah, I don't want to think of it as like a binary, because I think that there's a
there's a world of blending that happens between those two spaces. In terms of the memory work, some of I think the thing that's really taking me towards memory work as an important method to use. So this is like a third project out of 3 projects, and 2 of the first projects are very self-reflexive. So I use autoethnography and autoethnography, but the emancipatory aspects of intersectionality is like always thinking about the collective. And so it was really important for me somewhere in my thesis to make sure that I was returning to the collective, which has been my allyship and my solidarity with the various graduate students that I've met throughout my program, and how important those people have been for me. And also like thinking through labor exploitation, those kinds of things are important to come back to when you are going through the system. So that's one of the challenges, is like calling people in, and how do you call people in, I think, to the project to, again, in a way that feels good for everybody at the table. But yeah, those are just my initial thoughts. Thanks for those questions.
Perfect. Now let's go with the third presentation. Iraide, can you talk a little bit about if you have any ethical issues during the data collection process? If you can share a little bit about that, that would be one question. And another one is about if you would like to know if you were able to identify gender inequalities among professors, and what is their impact on the reproduction of inequalities inside the classroom?
Well, although here I have tried to summarize the part of the research we are working on now, during the first phase of the work, we evaluated the teaching guides of all subjects of the 5 degrees of the Faculty of Social Sciences. In addition, we passed a questionnaire to the entire student body of the faculty. Comparing the results of both of the evaluations and the questionnaires, we found on the one hand that the teaching is not sufficient in terms of gender or feminism, insofar as the syllabus, the bibliography, the methodologies, and even the language used by the teaching staff is androcentric. But on the other hand, we found that a large majority of the students are interested in being trained in gender issues. In fact, since we started researching gender blindness in university classrooms, some of us in the research team have been giving courses to the teachers to help them include the gender perspective in their subjects. Of course, only professors who are already allies in some way sign up. Now the challenge is to reach out to those teachers who are more skeptical about this gender perspective. In relation with the ethical problems, we I don't remember. I don't know what does she mean.
And Liz, I'm trying to interpret this, but maybe it's a little bit about how was with the consent of the participants and all those stuff. If you have any issues with the ethical committee, or maybe it was not any issues, and that's also fine. So maybe it depends on the experience.
In fact, no, there wasn't any kind of issues.
Perfect. Thank you so much. Let's go to our last presentation. So Tarana or Gayatri, each one, well, you decide which one could answer actually. So we have two. We have, in your opinion, do you think academics and activism are complementary or not? Is it something that can be done at the same time? We can be academics and activists at the same time, or is something that, how we deal with this paradox that you were mentioning in your presentation? I think that's about the first question. And the second question is about that you were mentioning, the learning from peers as a practice. Maybe have you thought about the influence from other people in other roles of power inside of the same institution? For example, professors, or I don't know, directors, or different roles in there, and if they have maybe a bigger influence or maybe less influence, what your research would have said about that. Yeah, those are the...
Yeah, I'll just take the first question. I think in a way we are not. I think it's a very nuanced way. We are not saying that academics should be doing activism, but the language of the academia should be connecting with. It should be at least readable. And accessible for people if you're writing in English. So somewhere now the thing is, it has only become an intellectual exercise, chasing citations, chasing academic positions, chasing promotions. Yes, this is part of your professional life, but then why these centers, why we have departments discussing feminist theory? There's the purpose of it is actually when you connect with the practice. So that's why we bring the classroom question, because for us, at least in classroom, if this can happen, like you are a teacher, and if with the students, if such a practice can happen, for us, that itself is like a feminist practice. And somehow we were trying to bring that point that even classrooms have a sad state of affairs, to put it very simply. So but I think somewhere we are not making the claim that academics should be doing activism and what is activism or like that. But it's in a way more nuanced, which we are trying to understand. Something it becomes very inaccessible, even for a student of from speaking from experience. When I read my coursework, when we had readings, the point which Sarang was telling, it is mandatory that you have these readings in your feminist studies course, otherwise you are not a scholar of feminist studies. But some of those readings were so inaccessible for a student. You do not know what they are talking about, you do not know what this who are these people who you're communicating, because you're reading mostly it's not just reading from the West, very particular examples we are forced to learn. Whether that investment is there in across the world to learn so much, get invested so much about the cultures and the society of the global South, or a country like India, or whether we are we have to put an extra effort to understand the US history also, Europe history also, so I think that classroom can itself be the starting point. Tarang, you can take add.
Yeah, sure. Thank you. Thank you so much for the questions. I just wanted to add in response to the first question again that this binary is also a way in which discourse within gender studies or women's studies gets formulated. So the reason why we are highlighting that is also to say, is also to problematize that who has the authority or the expertise to produce knowledge. And it's an invitation that we become or we adopt practices in the process of generating knowledge that make us more self-critical. That what authority we assume when we are producing knowledge, what are the mechanisms and processes with which exclusions are being produced within our own spaces. And for example, in a classroom, they get produced when we go outside as a researcher with the research participant. They get produced when we produce knowledge that gets published between the reader and the author. They get reproduced again when they are consumed by people. So become more attuned to these exclusions, and then try to work through those instead of assuming these binaries or becoming very defensive as a response. In the response to the second question, so learning from peers, the reason why we highlighted it is also that it's not a self-evident process that we discovered that in our classroom, for example, or in classrooms in these kind of disciplines which are so diverse, a lot of hierarchies are playing out within students as well. I think it's easier to acknowledge the hierarchy or the power, relationship between a student and a teacher, or between the administrative posts in a department and a student, because you are at the receiving end of a lot of bureaucratic, systems and processes that you don't have control over. And there is also this realm where professionally, because now these are also academic disciplines that are producing you as a professional academic. So there is a bit of reliance on your supervisors, on the teachers who are teaching you, on the administrative positions in your department, in terms of the references you will get, in terms of word of mouth or networks that you will be allowed to enter, to gain, to develop in terms of your career, especially in an early career position where you are a lot more vulnerable. So in terms of how you participate, or what discourse you generate, you will not be aware of how these dynamics actually impact where you are allowed to enter, in what capacity you will be given access and where you don't. So there is that aspect of sort of participation and hierarchy is there, of course. But for us, what we wanted to highlight is that one of the ways where we found it very not just empowering, but it was a truly transformational experience within the department, is how do you communicate and how do you learn from your peers? Because a lot of the time the stage is set for you in terms of the way you are taught. Either you will communicate in terms of classroom discussions, or you will produce assignments, you will produce written work, you will do group work, but you can navigate that in a very mechanical way, and those hierarchies and differences can be perpetuated in that manner. But when you encounter difference in somebody else's experience who's coming from a very different identity and a social location, how we can learn from the other in your classroom, their experience, that makes you really self-critically evaluate your journey, your privilege, what you have access to, what you don't have access to, and how that can become a way to really reflect on why we are choosing to think over certain problems and not choosing to think over certain other problems, why we have come up with answers to certain questions that we think are now resolved. How do we understand that two people are taking very different theoretical positions on the same problem, and instead of saying that, okay, we have to come to a conclusion that one is right and one is wrong, how do we register the fact that because we are coming from very different spaces and that we are valuing different things, those experiences need to be accommodated? And then learning from peers also then becomes, how do we in a university or an academic sort of a context where now you have to also produce as a professional, you have to produce publications, you are also vying for like very selected teaching positions, particularly in gender studies. In this, what is the role, and what is the transformational role rather of collaborations? How do you think together and produce a written work, and focusing on the process more than the outcome? So when you write together as a group, other than the fact that you will produce an outcome of as a written work, what happens to you when you are thinking and encountering difference and arguments with each other in the process of writing? How do you accommodate that in a written work where two people don't agree over certain things? Is it just like mentioning differences, or do you use that as a way to really query that this is where I'm coming from and this is why I have chosen that positionality? So I think that is a domain that we felt was very transformational for us. It's also very under-researched and under-talked about. So that was one reason to highlight. It's not about privileging that space over the others. So I think I'll end here.
Perfect. Thank you so much for that, and to raise so many questions, right? I think a lot of us were just thinking like, okay, yes, this makes sense, this is another question. Then like, yeah, there is so much that we can talk about this, and so many aspects and complex aspects actually that we could think about together. I know that we are past our time, at least with what we program, because right now in Chile is lunchtime, okay? So now probably people need their 1 hour to have lunch, but I would like to, I don't know, leave the space to 5 minutes more if you have any comments to comment between you, the presenters, so if you want to make a comment between your presentations or anything to add.
may I add something just about the whole idea that you know, the idea that feminist academia is mutually exclusive from activism. And if you look at feminist methodology and feminist praxis, you cannot, you know, be a feminist academic and not act. Well, that's my personal opinion, and I think I stand for a lot of people here, especially because I was also trained in the feminist academic space, where all of my mentors, especially in the Philippines, were also researchers and worked for different communities in their own ways. So I think praxis is such a big part of feminist research, but that's correct. Like, not everyone who studies women's studies is a feminist, which is very ironic. But at the same time, it's just the reality, insofar as maybe some institutions are stuck in the 1980s, and especially if you're in the third world or global south, like myself, there is that idea that a lot of women or a lot of development programs have targeted only women, and so we're all stuck in the whole idea of women in development, gender and development, you know, stereotypes, going beyond stereotypes. And it's progressed, the conversation has progressed so much more, or has gone so beyond that already. So I think that's just another thing to consider, just like that whole progression of the feminist movement, and at the same time how the global south has been impacted. So we have a lot of parallels when it comes to the feminist movements, but you know, we're also targeted by, you know, these international policies that really influence how we ourselves also look at gender, feminism, and how these contradict, you know, the emic ideas of gender within our own cultures and contexts.
Please, Kayati.
Just to add to what Alil said, like not everybody doing gender studies may be a feminist, but the unfortunate thing is like this is true, but it's also true that somehow the people in the discipline also thinks they have the power to tell who a feminist is and who a feminist is not, I mean, who is not a feminist. That's even more disturbing. And also, not everybody's primary struggle will be gender. So there is also, like, we are living in a very like, our world has a lot of problems. So for some it could be caste, nationalism, and, you know, class. So there is this like, the other thing is like looking for gender. So I think unless the praxis is really there, you don't really understand the mistakes you're doing. And also, I just raise my hand to thank everyone, because this session has been very healing also, because like people across are dealing with the same concern across the continents. And it has been like, this has been wonderful to listen to everybody and see that there is a solidarity we can build. We are not a minority as we think we are with these thoughts.
Thank you so much for those words. Yeah, I think a lot of people here can relate with many things that you all have said during the session. And this is special because also, as you were saying just now, it's interesting how we are looking into 4 different research, one done in, well, at least from New Zealand, about Philippines, another one in Canada, another one in Spain, another one in India. So we are in very different parts of the world, right? Talking about the same topics and the same complex aspects of feminism. So I really appreciate your presentations. And I think that would be for this session. Hopefully we are not going to end this conversation now, because we have the 3rd session. So it will be great to see you all in the next one, which is going to start at 1:30 in Chile time, okay? So if you look at it, it's better if each one can go to Google and say, okay, time now in Chile, and you can calculate for your own. So we are going to have the lunch break for now. And it has been super nice to have you all here. So thank you so much. The YouTube transmission is going to end here, but we are going to start it again for the next session, because we cannot leave the whole 1 hour of transmission of nothing. So, but that's it. Thank you very much to everyone.